Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. We are still shocked and traumatized by Donald Trump's victory,
Ah,
but we must continue. And in order to help us cope with this recent bout of trauma, we have returning guest Geo with us to really help us process
Yes.
what we're feeling
yeah,
right
I
now.
have to
I
lend
can't
my
do this. I can't do this.
I
uh,
have to lend my emotional labor to
My
war
emotional
report
labor.
in these trying times. But I've been told by a blue and on resist Twitter person that in 2 weeks they're going to audit the election. It's over for MAGA-tards, and democracy will be saved. Ukraine will be saved. China will be turned into an ash heap, as Russia will be turned into an ash heap, and then Joe Biden will, he'll resurrect out of the ashes, and he will be like a glorious phoenix, and democracy will be saved.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
We
He'll
never
shuffle his way into tremendous dark Brandon.
we never doubted
Yeah,
you for a
yeah,
moment.
Dark Brandon, yeah.
Did you see him? Where was he today? He was in South America. Was he in the? He was in this jungle setting they had him in.
It was some form they had in
Chile?
Brazil.
Oh,
It must
okay,
be
yeah.
Brazil.
Then he just like walks off into the jungle behind him.
And he was doing so good this past week. He was doing so good.
Yeah, it's funny. Like he apparently he's like the first president to actually visit the Amazon. So I guess like they're just doing like the lame duck tour of like, well, you better have like at least one first under your belt, so your presidency won't be totally unremarkable.
Yeah,
But
that's just it, right? His presidency now is kind of a joke.
yeah,
And the only two highlights are he let Ukraine strike deep into Russia. We're not sure. and he visited the Amazon jungle.
oh my god. No, it's funny though. It's because it's like it's totally like an optics thing, but like no one's gonna remember. But it is funny how this like one little thing. It's like the first time you've actually heard about Joe Brandon in like what a few months. Like, is
Oh
he
yeah,
still
at
alive?
least.
Yeah, like there should be like a study where like a significant portion of the American public doesn't even know he's still alive. So I don't know.
Well, I don't have the charts on me, but you can check the Google Trends, and it's did Joe Biden drop out as one election day?
Oh my god.
And I just need to know. I haven't found an answer for this. If you guys have an answer, if anyone in the audience has an answer, I need to know how many write-ins nationally did Joe Biden get in the election? I need to know.
I'd say like a few thousand.
Yeah, probably.
There's always a few.
I know he got at least one in Vermont from some of the polls that I saw out of there.
I remember there's like some kind of like CNN hack that's like a Kamala Coconuts person that said like Joe Biden should just step down so like Kamala could like she could like pull a Kim Campbell and be the president, like a female president for like a few months.
One of the funny things I saw just after the election, I saw videos of people who, like from different parts of the world. Like there was a cute girl from Czech Republic who said that she went to America for vacation and voted because she didn't need ID. And there was just random people claiming that they did this. I was visiting my cousin in Canada, and we drove over the border, and I voted.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
So I saw at least like four of these videos. I assumed that like this was like a trend, like a
Oh, it was even bigger on Twitter where people would post a picture of the ballot and then the passport of whatever country.
That's funny, man. That's jokes.
I saw
Because
somebody
I
had like
joked at work about doing that.
somebody had like an old USSR passport and did it.
I heard you could buy them on eBay. They're like a lot of money now
yeah.
in a USSR passport. Yeah.
I love junk shopping for that kind of stuff on eBay, and as a matter of fact, you can.
Yeah,
There was like that one Landshark tweet, or no, it was a Khrushchev surplus where it was like it was like a knife holster from the Bosnian War, and he's like, you know that this probably has some brain matter in it still, right?
I've heard crazy stuff. One guy bought a Black Sun decal from a Jewish guy at a flea market.
It is
Yeah,
wild
that's
how
his
much
name was
stuff.
Danny. Yeah,
It
from The
is wild
Believer.
how much stuff from Ukraine you can actually still get off of eBay right now. And I've actually ordered a bit of it. I won't disclose what exactly. I'll leave that to the imagination. But yeah, it still ships in. It takes like 3 weeks because of the war zone. But yeah, it's amazing. The marketplace stops for nothing. And I recommend just look at products on eBay from Ukraine. It's great. All kinds of stuff, anything you can imagine. And although the shipping is quite a bit because of circumstances, the base cost of it, if you just buy outright and don't do the auction thing, which I mean the auction can be fun as it is, but if you just buy outright, you actually get a decent deal. I got a nice watch. Now it stopped working. I need to take it to my watch guy, but I'm getting off topic here.
The only time I ever like really hardcore eBay maxed was one time I bought these etching tools for wood engraving printmaking, and it was I like outbid this guy in Tennessee, but like the whole night I remember I was on BTR and like the whole night I was just like lurking on my phone and like outbidding the guy. It was from EC Mueller's too. It's like from the 50s, but it's like amazing quality. Like you really can't find any good etching tools anymore. So unless people make them themselves though, but like it's kind of like yeah. But anyways,
Yeah, you see that.
so
with
don't worry
camera
about it.
equipment.
Trump's gonna, he's not gonna be in office. They're gonna stop the steal, and yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see this. I mean, it's whatever. They're coping. It didn't work in 2016, and it's not going to work now. I mean, let's be honest. Like, if they want to stop him, and if there's one thing we've learned this year that there's many that do, they're not going to find legal means to do it.
Oh God, no. I mean, they could just try to do, you know what again, but like, I don't know if that would really work.
Yeah.
I mean, it would like if they did do that, like it would be a massive demoralization. But like, I don't know.
Oh, it
Anyways,
would be,
yeah.
yeah.
Apparently Frank Castle got punched by a woman again on Fish Tank Live. So that's like 2 for 2 seasons. No, actually all 3, because I think Letty tried to hit him on season 1. So I know that Taylor hit him like in season 2, but now Tay hit him in season 3. So Frank Castle has been abused by women all 3 seasons of Fish Tank Live. But here's a random innocuous fact. Anyways.
But we do have some less important matters to cover, like the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean that's not, Yeah,
just a brief segment, cover some of the stuff that you might have missed.
Yeah.
Okay, if you guys like, we can get on with the Battlefront maps. The first one, of course, is Zaporozhye. As you can see, this front has been not very active, but I would say the last 5-6 days, it has reactivated again. The Russians have made some small incremental gains, as you can see, above Robotyne and other areas around Gulyapolye. The next slide is a small gain that was made today, again, by the Russians, to basically the east of Robotyne and Orekhov. Orekhov is like the major logistical town north of Robotyne. That's what this next map will show you. and I've outlined where the Russian gain was and where Orykhov is and where the line of attack, I think, will be for the Russians. Orykhov is, as I say, it's a place that's been quite inactive for almost a year. And it's where the Ukrainians still have a lot of their elite forces that were trained by NATO in 2023. So that is to say that they have a lot of manpower here, at least as much as the Russians. And going in a straightforward attack from north to south, you can see where the Russian gains are at the bottom, would probably be very difficult for the Russians. Because Orykhov will have all kinds of UAV operators that are going to be in the town that will be generally secure. But as you can see with the arrow, there's a string of villages, and this arrow would give the Russian forces cover to reach Orykhov. Now, Orykhov, of course, you can see all around it, there's a lot of defense networks. Most of it are north of the town. However, you see a substantial amount to the south and to the west. To me, this is where this would be, if the Russians are serious about Orykhov, and this is not just about putting pressure in one area of the battlefront over another in order to make gains elsewhere, then I would say that's what this will be the plan of attack. But I don't think that this is Russia's most important goal right now, in my opinion. So the next slide is basically where the most amount of fighting has been taking place for the last 6 months. And this is, the Kurahove, Ugledar, Pokrovsk front, that whole area of southern Donbass. You can see the gains that the Russians have been constantly having since the last show. You can see those pockets that are developing, that are causing to be sort of, it creates a snag. It creates a longer battle line, right, which will usually tend to make the aggressor, while it will give him more vectors of attack against the pockets, at the same time it extends his manpower, as it were. So now let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you where the Russians have made gains just north of Kurakhove and Nova Ilinka. So small gain today in this area, and I believe it's the town is, I believe it's called Beresky. So the Russians had to capture several large fortifications in here and Ilinka, but the whole purpose of this is you're going to see what I'm talking about in the next slide. This is where their momentum will go, and this is the pocket that they're going to want to get rid of as they press forward. So they're going to hug along very closely with the water reservoir that borders Kurakhove. Kurakhove is like the major town on the south banks of this water reservoir. And yeah, I don't know if you're there yet, Constantine. Hello?
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so this is the direction that they're going to want to go on. What this will do, by getting rid of this pocket, it will put Kurakhove in danger, because the entire northern flank of the town will now be under Russian control, which will mean that they can position artillery from this position. They'll be able to bomb it, and if there are troops Russian troops that will be storming Kurakhove from the south and from the east, this will give them support. Now, if we move just slightly north of the map, we're going to see the Pokrovsk front and what's happening there. So the Russians reached within like 10, 11 kilometers of Pokrovsk. And since then, what they've been basically doing is creating a very wide area. You can see that they've gone south of the city and are now beginning to move westward of it. Again, this will give them a very large vector of attack because, unlike the Ukrainians, the Russians have more manpower now. They have an average of like 1,000 volunteers a day. That's been going on for quite a while. The next map will give you an idea of where these two areas are located. So the circle at the top, that's Pokrovsk, and the little squiggle line at the bottom, that's Kurakhove. This is both in the Donetsk region. And what you're going to see is that push westward that you see between these two areas that I've outlined, that's going to go quite a bit. And then what the Russians will do is push north. In my opinion, that's what they will do. And they will want Kurakhove basically like as a logistics center to use against the Russians in their push to Pokrovsk to be a non-entity. The reason for this is because, well, it's obvious because if the Russians take Pokrovsk, this will mean one of two towns that will be the most important for the Ukrainians. And so there are two towns that the Ukrainians talk about as being absolutely vital that the Russians cannot take, and that is Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar. The reason is both of them are kind of hubs. Pokrovsk, of course, is a hub for the entire Donbass region with 6 road and railroad lines leading it to connect with every other imaginable area where arms shipments are sent to it. And Chasiv Yar, of course, we'll see in another map, is basically the front door to a string of villages that begins with Konstantinovka right next to it, and it goes all the way to Slavyansk in the north. Well, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. But okay, so next slide is the Chasiv Yar front that I was talking about just now. And you can see now, you can see gains that the Russians have made and some small gains that the Ukrainians have made. This is a very, like I say, this is a very, very important town. Of course, it's been a real struggle for both sides. This is probably one area where there has been heavy attrition, if you ask me. But the Russians have basically secured much of there's a canal that runs through this area, and most of the canal now is all under Russian control. The next slide shows you an area that the Russians and the Ukrainians have traded places. That large yellow outline that you see near the bottom of the frame, this is an area that the Russians took control of a few days ago, maybe 5 days ago, and the Russians took it back 2 days ago, and now the Ukrainians have taken it. But so it's a lot of back and forth. But the thing to remember is that the Russians are now in Chasiv Yar proper. The next slide is a kind of a blow up of it. Well, this is a little bit of south of Chasiv Yar, right? Okay, and why is it important? Well, the next slide will show you the major settlements that make up the last line of defense. This is why Chasiv Yar is important, because you see this sort of northwesternly angle of villages. Now, the Russians have had a very difficult time trying to, hammer out straight this front, and it's why, like for instance, if they take Chasiv Yar, there is a big town that's much bigger than Chasiv Yar immediately on its doorstep, like less than 4-5 kilometers away, and that's Konstantinovka. But the thing with Konstantinovka is that it is all on low ground. All these towns are on low ground, which is why everything to the east of them is so well fortified and cannot be given up. Yes, so the next area that we're going to move to is the northern front. Yes. So this is another area where I would say that there has been some heavier attrition for the Russians, and that's trying to gain territory in the Terny area along the Zhirabets River. But you can see that the Russians have made some gains there. And if you look way at the bottom near the corner, you see these yellow outlines. That's the Seversk front. So the Russians have been pushed out yet again in this area. These two areas are probably the areas where the most competent Ukrainian command has been. Now, part of the advantage that the Ukrainians have in this area, of course, is you see these. You can see on the map the dark patches that run like in a scattered way across the bottom of the graphic, right? These are forests, and there is a river that runs through them, which the Zhirabets River runs partly out of this, as well as the Oskal, right? And the Ukrainians have held this territory really well, and it's why the Russians have had difficulty taking this area. But I'll show you why the plan of attack that the Russians have. So in the next slide, you can see several gains that the Russians have made. They've crossed over the Zhirabets River. This is just north of the area that I was talking about. Well, this is a slight blow up of it. And then if we go further north, you can see the areas where the Russians have had the most amount of gains, and that is in the Kupiansk front. So as you can see, there's a pincer movement moving around Kupiansk. The Russians have reached the Oskal River, and so there is a huge chunk that the Russians control here. And, at Valdai, Putin recalled that there are about 15,000 troops that are stuck in this area. There's only one bridge. We don't know if there are basically 5 brigades that are definitely here according to military land, but we don't know if those brigades are in full. They probably are not. So the number could be as low as, I don't know, 10,000 or 8,000. 15 is only if they were fully stacked, but of course we don't know. Now, the next slide will show you what basically what I think the Russians will be doing. So you can see that they're going to try to cut off that bulge that's left in the pincer movement that I just described. Then they're going to go towards the Oskal River. You can see, as I said, this is the area where the Russians have made the most amount of gains. And what they'll do is they'll push from north to south to take care of that area where they've had a lot of difficulty. And just briefly, if we go, we'll see the area that the Russians control in Slavyansk, which is the next slide. That's at the very top. So this was kind of like a very interesting development. Now, it was, again, about 4 or 5 days ago, maybe more, that a video emerged of a lone BMP, Russian BMP, driving into the middle of Kupiansk, unassailed. I did not see any men on top, so I don't know how many men it was carrying. Usually these things can carry a driver, a co-driver, and then roughly 6, 7 other guys who are going to get out. The next slide will give you a slightly better idea, Konstantin. This slide will show you the small gains that they've made today. They took over I don't know if it was a hospital or some kind of industrial area. But that's the red outline that you see. The green outline, that lime green outline, is the territory that they've taken in the last few days. Now, follow the outline that is neither blue or red, and you can see where this BMP stopped. Now, I didn't know what happened, and so in one of the chats, I asked, well, whatever happened to that BMP? This is a small unit, less than 10 men. was going on. And apparently, one guy said that he saw video footage of them surrendering, which is exactly what I thought. Like, so, I guess it was a moment of miscommunication. So the next slide is from Syriac Maps. I'm just going to briefly go over, yeah, this is in the area just south of Kurakhove, where the Russians have made major gains again. This is yet another town named Ilinka that I've already mentioned. Like, they have 3 Ilinkas in this region: Ilinka, Nova Ilinka, and then another Ilinka. So you can see it here. This is an area just basically north of Ugledar, but the Russians have far removed themselves from Ugledar at this point. That's how much their advances have been. Now, the last slide, or second last slide, is the front in Toretsk. The Ukrainians have been very successful in pushing the Russians out of certain regions, and the Russians sort of reinstigating themselves in others. So pay attention to the yellow lines. Those are the areas that the Ukrainians have taken in the last, like, let's say, 4 days. And then yesterday, the Russians have pushed again deep into a part of southern Toretsk. The lime green outline that's less bright than the yellow, those are the areas that the Russians have gained in the last 4 or 5 days. So overall, this is a bit of a stalemate in Toretsk. Toretsk is also another important town. It's very big. It's just south of Chasov Yar. It would also be like a very important area for the Ukrainians to hold. And then the last slide basically outlines, remember when I was talking about the 2 areas where the Russians have had the most amount of trouble on the front lines, and that one of them was in the Seversk direction, and the other one was in the sort of the southern part of Zherebets River before you get to Liman. In the Kremenaya area, basically, in the Toretsk, sorry, no, not Toretsk, I can't read the writing, it's so blurry, but this area is just basically west of the Russian town of Kremenaya. So those are the 2 areas where the Russians have had the most amount of trouble, and the area where you can see the dark patches. This is all very heavy forest with rivers, very difficult terrain to cross over. So these areas that the Ukrainians have held, they were very strategic. Probably like when the Ukrainians took over in their Kharkov initiative back in 2022, holding on to these areas was probably like the most important thing. Now, I should say that the area that I've outlined at the bottom, that is an area that has gone back and forth many times since 2022, and that, like, the Russians weren't. How can I put it? Only in June or July did the Russians get into this area after they liberated Lysychansk. I'm talking more about the red outline that you see further north. That is the area where the Ukrainians were very smart in entrenching themselves in, and basically taking that more chunks out of that forest. Now, they did control that forest even before Lysychansk, so this has been a very pivotal area. It's basically what keeps a town like Seversk, that is immediately east of Slavyansk, safe. And Seversk is in a region that is more hilly. The town itself is in a low area, but the immediate area in front of it and behind it, east and west, are hilly. So it gives it an advantage. Anyway, so that's it for the the battle map news.
Well, with all that being said, I do have one additional item for Pokrovsk, and that is
Mm.
it has finally received the kiss of death. Zelensky
Oh,
has
yes,
visited.
yeah.
Let me see if I can get a good image of him on the front lines, but for those of you who have kept up, whenever Zelensky shows up in town, it is not long until it falls. And Pokrovsk has been at the center of, I would say, probably one of the most, maybe not most, but one of the more embarrassing scandals recently in the war, where the city employees, as the Russians were approaching, this would have been July, August, I think right around the time the Kursk front started, were planting flowers instead of building defenses.
Yes.
And we're, like I said, we're talking about the rapid advances we had in the summer, right around the time the Kursk front opened, and that was what we saw happening. And to my knowledge, the situation has not improved any since then. But I'll just get this picture of Zelensky at Pokrovsk right here because it's exactly what you'd expect. Uh,
I don't know why he continues to do this.
every picture he takes looks like this, and it's
Yes.
ridiculous. It's
Remember, he also did this with like way back with Bakhmut and Ugladar. Like he just, I don't know why he does this.
yeah. This is him. He's touring the front lines, and you can see right there. He's in front of the Kupiansk sign. For those of you who can read the Cyrillic right there, I'll send it to you guys so you know which one
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
Oh, I know
I'm
which
sure
one.
you've
I
both
saw it.
seen it, but I'll just send it for reference. And I mean, this is actually relatively shortly after Bezoglaya's visit, and you'll notice this cycle when the Russians take a major town. Bezoglaya will show up in the next town that is slated to be on the front line, the next big epicenter of the war. She'll report the problems, honestly, and like I said, there's something going on there. She is allowed to speak as freely as she can for a reason. And then uh, the clown shows up. And this is a particularly unflattering picture of it, so I like him. I like it. I like him in this light, I should say. I know that one it's blurry, but I know the one's just supposed to be like an oblast flag because you got the Ukrainian flag. It looks like you got the red and black band right flag, but then the oblast flag from this angle and the resolution of the picture, it does vaguely look like a pride flag. Oh, and I should mention the most important news out of Ukraine is that Zelensky is prepared to sign a draft law that will allow "quote unquote" same-sex family unions.
Oh yeah.
Whoa!
So
Yeah,
we've
they've waited
won.
for this one for quite a while.
Look,
Yeah.
He
Crimea.
looks pretty rough though here. Like his eyes, like he's got the Senpaku
Yeah.
eyes. He's not doing like
He's
he's
looked like this for
praying.
like a solid 2-3 months. He's looked really
Yeah,
bad.
it's over.
Yeah, that's.
I think especially Trump winning that also like set him, it put him over the edge, you know. So it's like, oh fuck, it's bad. It's tough. It's tough.
And for those of you who listen to Zelensky speak on a semi-regular basis, which I imagine most of you probably do, you'll notice that like the guttural growl from hell that he starts every sentence with is getting worse.
Yeah.
Yes, I know what you mean. I guess the other thing we should mention is about 2 days ago there was a major attack of Russian Kinjals. I mean every type of missile you can imagine. The Ukrainians claim roughly about 120, and about 80 or 90 drones. The Get On 2 types, but other types have been developed since. And this is again really worsened the situation for Ukraine in terms of like their energy, the energy that the civilians need, as well as the energy that those places that still are part of the Ukrainian industrial complex can still manufacture their military hardware. So
And much like the one about 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago, it was
yeah, in
right as
August, I think.
it was right as morning was breaking, and the confirmed hits they had from that were in Odessa. The air defense that they had over the one port in Odessa, the video actually leaked of that, giving away the air defense positions of
Yeah.
them firing counter fire on the drones. That was a wild video. I recommend. I think Lord Bebo posted both on his Twitter and Telegram. He's a good source of that kind of on the ground stuff. So if you want to look at that, so Odessa, Zaporozhye, Kryvyi Rog, Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Kiev, Kropyvnytsky and Nikolaev were the ones that were confirmed hit. I believe there were also some hits in as far west as Rovno as well.
Venetia.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Rovno.
uh, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and this did lead to emergency blackouts because, of course, they did hit the power infrastructure. But as emergency procedures, even if they don't destroy it, they will power down while they do whatever repairs they can. And this was speculated. Now, of course, a lot of it was up in the air as it was happening in real time. And I'm sure you've all seen the Telegram newsfeed blow up before your eyes, as has happened many times, including this time, where it was speculated one of the major hubs that exports energy to the European Union was actually hit, which,
Yes. Yeah. In the Carpathian area,
yeah. So there were power
which
outages.
is, I guess, where Rovno would be.
Yes, that would be around that area. And like I said, there were the power outages actually as far west as Rovno, and explosions as far west as Lvov. Khmelnytsky was also hit particularly hard. Khmelnytsky, excuse me, has been one of these
Yeah.
other oblasts that has been hampered particularly hard. I know that was the one where they hit the ammo depot that actually had so much ammunition it created a mushroom cloud. So they have been extending their strikes further and further west throughout the course of this war. I don't think this is quite now. Maybe it's because all the dust hasn't settled, and we'll see what this attack really looked like within a few days. But this didn't seem bigger than the one in August, and the one in August seemed like the true display of force. And
Mm-hmm.
but once again, this is all leading up in the winter, and this shows the fragile state of Ukrainian infrastructure. And I think this has always been the trump card, as it were, no pun intended. And especially with the talks of the ATACMS being granted to the Ukrainian forces that they are going to allow quote unquote limited strikes within Kursk as Biden's lame duck move. I do
Mm-hmm.
feel that in terms of retaliation, a lot of people say it's going to be the asymmetrical. Yes, I believe this might spill over in the Middle East. That there might be a case of that when it comes to Russia's relationship with Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, etc. But I do think the ace up Russia's sleeve is eviscerating the Ukrainian power grid and creating another refugee crisis in Europe. Now, I would say it'd be of much different character than the previous refugee crises, but a refugee crisis nonetheless.
Yeah, you can, because of course he's attacking in November. Um, Russia has lessened the amount of attacks that they've done of this nature since, let's say, November of 2022. There was a pocket of time in 2023 where they had almost as many and is almost as daily. But in 2024, they've done much less of this. You have to think about like where are the assets, right? After so many attacks, these assets go underground. They're relocated in other areas, so that has to be factored into it. Now, the attacks that the Russians do, we give you kind of like a sliver of it, but when you hear what average Ukrainians are saying, there's like some of the big cities will have an attack a night, but it's small. It's not to the same degree, right? So that's always going on. Towns like Odessa, to a lesser extent Nikolaev, but now other towns like Dnepr and Zaporozhye, they're getting hit more often. Kharkov is another town that gets hit routinely, but not in a kind of a mass attack that we saw, over 200 missiles and UAVs. Like I say, I think a lot of the reason why the Russians did more of that is in the past, it could come down to supplies, but it could also be just what I said earlier, that those assets are difficult to hit now. Not the energy terminals, obviously, but other targets, because the opponent always adjusts. They adjust, and those targets have they're either not in Ukraine anymore, they've gone into different regions or underground, like in Kharkov, for instance. In any case, I don't want to belabor the point.
I think the last thing I'll
Uh,
bring up about this is, did you see the damage to the residential area in Odessa from the Patriot missile?
yes, I saw that. Yeah. No,
Because
yeah, so yeah. Go ahead.
it was the same story over and over again, where there were strikes, the air defense is activated, and as happens, the air defense missiles land wherever. And this time they landed in a residential area. They claimed the Russians targeted yet another civilian area. The same story we've heard a million times over. But the photo and video evidence we have now, I'm no weapons expert, but judging by the comparisons people post, I think it's a pretty convincing case that yes, these were the remnants of Patriot battery missiles, and that these landed on the residential areas, and that the Russian strikes are far more targeted towards mainly infrastructure and military targets, and isn't just the blanket bombing of residential areas like we saw in Donetsk for a number of years, in Bryansk, in Belgorod, and now especially in Kursk as well. And I suppose with that we should move on to the story of the Kursk
Yeah.
missiles.
Well, I mean, it's that's what do they expect? The Russians are gonna like hone in on every single kindergarten that they can find and just
Of
bomb
course.
them, like, you know.
Come on, they're not Israel. Get real.
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy, curb your anti-Semitism there. But anyways, no, I was gonna ask about looking at I believe the third map Konstantin posted. They're on the doorstep of Petropavlovka. Do you think that eventually they're just gonna make a beeline all the way for Andreevka, or is that like months and months down the line? Or yeah, I mean, you never know.
You mean third one from the top?
Yeah, from third one from the top.
It's like the third one I ever posted.
Yes, in
right?
Telegram, the third one that you posted, and I put them in the Skype chat numbered as well.
Okay, I see.
Because there was always like talks about Andreevka being an eventual major
Andreevka,
hub
yeah. Like
Yeah.
eventually that will come about. But I mean, like I say, the Russians have much more work to do in these areas that are closer to Donetsk city.
Yeah.
Although Donetsk city is basically out of artillery range now. But like when you look at that map, we could repost it, Constantine.
I have it
You
up.
can see you have.
Yeah, I have it up on screen.
Yeah. And Andrievska is, I believe, like part of that chain of villages. Yes, eventually, but this area around Kurahove, like if it becomes, I guess what I'm trying to say is if the Russians don't take care of this, then
Right.
taking on Pokrovsk head on in the north is going to be too difficult, right? That's why this area in the south has to be reduced. They have to take this bulge, which is really made up of two smaller bulges, one south of Korehovo and one north of Korehovo. And like once this collapses, you can see there isn't much defense left for the Ukrainians, right? And that means afterwards you can push north or you can push west. And you won't be, it'll be very flat. There's not going to be a lot of villages, and there's not going to be a lot of dugouts either. So that's why, like, Andreevka is to the west of this area, but
Yeah.
Korahove, I believe Korahove and the Pokrovsk front will be occupying Russia's attention well into the new year. Well, not well into the new year. I would expect by February or March that the Pokrovsk will probably fall. Now, the last time you were on the show, I said realistically, like if the Russians can capture Pokrovsk, by Christmas. I didn't say whether it was Orthodox Christmas. No, I'm joking, but that would be like a real timeline, like just to be realistic about it, right? What is it today? November the 17th.
That would be like a huge loss for Ukraine, though, in terms of logistics.
That's much more important. And basically, like what we're seeing in the fighting in the south in Korahove is basically the staging everything in order to take Pokrovsk, right?
Yeah.
once Pokrovsk is taken, all these other areas will have a very, very difficult time getting resupplied.
Well, what is still the major buildup in terms of older fortifications for Ukraine? Is it Pokrovsk or is it Andreevka, or like if I'm talking like the more like, let's say, the real buildups that started from 2014 onwards, or they're all pretty much gone?
Yeah, these buildups obviously came after 2014.
Yeah.
But if we continue looking at the map and you see in the red all the yellow that you see, that is where the Ukrainians were before 2020.
Right.
Sorry, before 2022.
But in terms of their base of operation, in terms of the front lines, not Kiev, but like the frontline bases of operation, it's in basically these areas. And
yeah, and now I would say that I'm trying to. Constantine, go down 1, 2, 3. Like I say, okay, you know what? You know, Constantine, the one that I have of the situation in Czechoslovakia Yar with the 4 red outlines. Go to that one.
That is, let me see.
It's like 5 or 6 down from the one that we're on now.
I think that's, no, it's not number 8. That is 11. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. So if you put this up, this is really like a very important area, right?
Mm-hmm.
This area, some of these areas, the Russians were in there in 2014, and the Ukrainians pushed them out, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, they had a
right.
Yeah.
But like, if you look at,
I think Strelkov was
direct your eye
those
to
areas.
if you direct your eye to the right, and you look at where those heavy yellow line entrenchments are that are under Russian control, that is where things were in, up until February or March 2022, right? So those cities that I outlined immediately north and northwest of Chasiv Yar, those are the most well fortified area in the entire Donbass, right? At the very top, you have Slavyansk, then Kramatorsk, and then in the bottom, you have
well, there's a whole chain that seems to be protecting Kramatorsk. Like that seems to be they're anticipating the Russians eventually storming, or at least going right up to it. There's about 3 or 4 lines of defenses there.
And this is why I think, like, you hear about Ukrainians not making great defensive lines. Now, the reason I think this is the case is because it's a demoralization.
Yeah.
Right. They went into this war thinking, back in January, February, especially early February 2022, when they started launching attacks on the Russians, or the sector of Ukraine that wanted to split off from the rest of Ukraine. I think they went into this believing, the Americans are going to scare the shit out of the Russians. The Americans control the market. We're going to win. We're going to win. And if that, if nothing like that happens in the first year, and you're ordered to make defensive lines well east, 20, 30, 40, 50 kilometers, west of where your front line used to be, and the Russians still haven't crossed too many where you are now, that's basically telling them, look, we're probably not going to be able to, we're not only not going to get this territory, we might have to give up territory, right? And that's demoralizing. Now, you can look at it and say, well, the reason this is happening is because we're trading time for space. We're trading space for time, right? But they know that the average combatant is on the Ukrainian side is not necessarily going to look at it that way, right?
Of course not.
And I think that's why some of these areas are not very well built. There's corruption, yeah, absolutely. There's also the fact that a lot of these places still have people who are very loyal to Russia, who don't want to be part of Ukraine. And and there are,
Well,
of course,
there's porous spots in these defensive lines, and the Russians are very good at penetrating those porous spots and surrounding different defensive lines. Yeah.
that's what you see. Yeah, I mean, if you could sum up 2024, it's basically the Russian triumph in southern Donbass, like that whole area of Ukraine that fell from Ugledar and west of it and north of it, the whole Pokrovsk front, because like a lot of people thought like taking Avdiivka was like kind of like another Bakhmut battle. It was hard, but it wasn't as hard as Bakhmut. Yes, the big losses for both sides. However, still not at the Bakhmut level. But I think what a lot of people felt was it would stop, that the Russians would not have enough steam. Now, there was an article that came out not long ago by the Institute for the Study of War. And remember that back in, I think, September or October, they were saying that Russia would have run out of steam. And now they wrote an article saying, well, we were wrong. Russia hasn't run out of steam. As I said in the last few episodes, and maybe even the one that you were on the last time, I said Russia is just going to go with like this pace. They always have enough men. They always have enough arms for the men. They always have enough for replacement, and their ambitions will work within their confines. This is what they are able to do. They're not going to go beyond their means. I think, in 2022, they presumed that they could change the situation in Kiev directly, through negotiations and intimidation, and that this thing would be resolved without having huge losses of life. And obviously, that wasn't the case. And so now, this is the way they're going to be fighting the war. And that's that, because like the war basically has shown just how vulnerable tanks and infantry fighting vehicles are with absolutely cheap technology like UAV drones, like a drone for a few $100, ammunition, and like you're getting rid of millions of dollars worth of equipment, right?
And any country
So
with an industrial base worth its salt is able to crank these things off the line in no time.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think these two, the Twin Cities, would potentially be like another Bakhmut, because Kramatorsk before the war had 146,000 people. Slavyansk had about roughly 100,000 people. So those are like major cities, and I'm sure isn't the way they work is that when they anticipate a battle, they'll clear out the civilians beforehand. But
Yes.
Are there still civilians in these two cities? I think so.
Oh, and Kramatorsk and Slavyansko, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But that's
Now,
what I
how
mean,
many
like,
have left? I don't know.
Well, they see the population even before the war was on the decline, but that's a trend in Ukraine. Yeah, okay, so in 2001 it was 200,000, decline all the way to 2022, 146,000. But still, like,
Yes.
that's a major city. That's like
Major city, yeah.
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 I mean, yeah.
And with the Twin Cities, something that did come to my attention with that was there was the story today, or not today, but this past week, about Olaf Scholz trying to get through to call Putin. And this is almost beat for beat the same what France and Germany did in 2014 when the separatists were on the doorsteps of the Twin Cities. And he tried to repeat that move. It is panic. They are wanting to come to terms, and we're seeing it play out again and again where now, not so much the French this time because Macron is more or less completely in the pocket of the Atlanticists, but the Germans looked at this, and especially Olaf Scholz coming up on an election. The German elections are tentatively going to be slated for February of 2025, so we'll see. I don't know if that's official yet, but point being is September.
Just enough time to ban the ADF.
Oh, of course.
Oh no.
Point being is there's going to be German elections by September of next year at the latest, and Olaf Scholz wants to come to the electorate, and I don't think he's seeking another term. I think the the Social Democrats are going to be putting up a new candidate for chancellor, but he wants to be able to, at least for the sake of his party, say, we at least got a stalemate in Ukraine, we got a ceasefire in Ukraine, and we can walk away with this. And while Putin
And we'll
didn't...
pick up the pieces before the Chinese fucking process the rest of the factories that we have. Yeah.
Exactly. And, of course, this drew backlash from all the other Western countries. Olaf Scholz was scolded, more or less, as if he were some unruly child for even attempting something of this sort.
Yeah,
And...
you mean the other Western countries that don't have to pick up the bill of funding Ukraine?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
that's
of course.
really, you know,
You made Lithuania so mad. I hope you realize that.
You hurt their feelings, you know. They have feelings too.
Latvia is disgusted with you.
Well, the Saxon ever awakening. Oh, I shouldn't even say that in public, you know. It's like that really does. It really enrages something very archetypal. Like the old Teutonic Knight is still itching to come out of the German. You know, maybe not, but you know, it's like, yeah. No, Olaf Schlong. I mean, it's very
Olaf Schlong.
Olaf Schlong. It's a legitimate political phrase according to Donald J. Trump. No, it's very like, isn't that a testament to how things are going in Europe, to where Germany is sinking into the parliamentary politics of like Italy and France? You know, a stable government. How long was Merkel in there for? Like what, 15 years?
12 years.
12 years. Okay, yeah. But now, like, they seem to be losing governments.
Coalition. Unheard of.
Yeah.
In German, like you said, that's a coalition that you get somewhere like in Spain or Italy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Italy, governments fall all the time. It's like a sport. It's like, you know.
Yeah,
it's like watching Milan FC, right?
I'm shocked that Maloney is still in power right now. It's been over 2 years. I figured something would have happened already.
Yeah,
I guess she kissed the right rings, but that's a conversation for a different day.
I think it's because she's become like a sort of mini celebrity too. That's another thing. Yeah. Not on the level of like Berlusconi, but like still.
I think, no, that's impossible.
Yeah. She's their anime queen, so it's. She's got a good face. So no, but like that's what I mean. Like, for Germany to sink into the politics of the Mediterranean, it's like, oh my God, what are they doing? You know, like it's not good.
It's a trap. It's a trap.
It's a trap. They'll eventually Gladio themselves.
Oh, that's brilliant. Eventually they'll Gladio themselves.
Oh, fuck.
Bro, hang back.
Oh, but yeah, so these two major cities, I will anticipate a bloodbath if by the end of the year or even early next year they do get on the doorsteps of the Twin Cities. But then you never know, right? You never know the position of the Ukrainian military either. Obviously they will mount a spirited defense of these two cities, but I mean, I don't know, Bakhmut had a unique conditions and had, well, let's put it this way, very unique people at the front, as the figureheads of that battle. Rest in peace, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Or maybe he's alive in the Ural Mountains. I've been on good authority on a Bulgarian bodybuilder has told me that Yevgeny Prigozhin, he faked his death in order to go right to the Tibetan mountains and complete what Nikolai Roerish has started. He will try to find Shambhala, and he will activate the Maitreya to unite all of the 10,000 Buddha lands. And
oh my God.
Yeah, so that's Yevgeny Prigozhin. He's actually alive, and he's going to become the next vizier of the of Shambhala. So we'll see what happens with that. You know, if you see a magenta light coming out of the east, then you will know that he found Shambhala. But I've been told this. I don't know if it's true or not. Don't believe me, but we'll see.
I believe you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and Yuri Ukin is also with him.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
So, you know what's funny? I was browsing these Russian Telegram channels, and I saw that this guy, he was a soldier, and he was like with his girlfriend, and he's got a particular patch with a particular wheel. They just like, apparently like that type of paraphernalia is all over Russian social media. So it's like,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You know, Z for the Right People had like an interesting article that he wrote about the early days of the conflict in Ukraine in 2014. Like
oh
back
yeah,
in 2014, you take a city like Kharkov, right? Now, you know, most people know about how like pro-Russians were pushed out, but before that, there's all kinds of videos of like the locals there beating up on Ukrainians or Ukrainians who had been shipped over to turn the tide, right?
yeah,
I have photos of this and whatnot, um, and it was around this time in 2014. You know, I remember like the battalion that was getting the most amount of notoriety on the Ukrainian side was IDAR. You know, particularly cruel and so forth and so on. And
oh
but
yeah,
one of the things that it, you know, it was they who had you know, like the Nazi symbols and paraphernalia that were featured in the Western press during you know, Obama's uh, last term. So, but the thing that Z for the Right People brings up is that groups like Azov Battalion, right, at that time still flew like the imperial tricolor, the black, yellow, and white, right?
yeah,
And so they were very right wing, but they were right wing that was, I guess, to some extent sympathetic to Russians, but maybe not the Kremlin, right? What they didn't like was the Soviet boomer angle that was being pushed, and to some extent was um, supported by the Kremlin. You know, that
yeah,
kind of that kind of messaging, let's say. So, and then basically what happened is they turned against this, right? It allowed them to, like, they pivoted away, and then Azov became the new IDAR. But this was a kind of a lost moment, for a lost opportunity for the Russians. And I'm glad you brought this up, because now they don't really, I mean, there are units, you know, that have the communist flags. But they're all, like, all of them are flags from World War II, right? And you know, it's the same battalion 75 years later, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so it's not the same thing as the kind of flags that they had in 2014. And this is why you have like groups like Rusich that are, you know, they're extreme, like they were there in 2014, and you could see that like ideologically they're the same like as Azov. They are, you know, extreme right wing, you know, I would say pagan right wing, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? I don't have
yeah.
to elaborate.
They're not the let's say wholesome Chungist third worldist Duganite type of like esoteria. They're like a different wavelength. So
Well, I mean, they don't tap into anything. Like, I don't think Dugan has any inspiration with anybody on the front lines. I think like all that is like that's just part of their history from World War II, right?
yeah,
Where for them, like, it was a war against, it was just as much a war against Germans as the war against Nazis, because it would mean their subjugation if they lost. So that's why those flags are revered. I don't think people revere, like, of course there are some units that revere them for ideological reasons. I'm just saying that um, the Russians in 2014, I think, made a mistake. Um, but at the you know, I think also if you look at Western press at that time, they were very hard on these units like Azov and Idar.
oh
You
yeah,
know, after Azov had sort of morphed into more of an IDAR battalion than you know, than what it was previously, where it was sort of, you know, harkening back to the Russian Empire and so on, and you know, zero communism, Russian Empire, all that kind of stuff. Um, that. So anyways, I just thought that was an interesting thing to remember. It was 10 years ago, so in 10 years, there's probably less Russian boomers.
Oh yeah.
It actually brings up a point that, for those of you who recall, Vile Varangian, former guest of the show, who I'm still in semi-regular contact with, had actually made the point that in many ways, especially since 2022, with their recruitment efforts, it has become something of his words of a choose your own adventure ideologically on the front lines, where
Yes.
they will just
Yeah.
bring in anyone who's willing to fight for the Russian cause, whether they harken back to Soviet nostalgia or have some dreams of what the Russian Empire once was or should be.
Yeah.
Or, like I said, anyone from the weird spinning wheel pagan people to like more hardcore Orthodox Christians from like
Yeah,
more
you see a lot
nationalistic
of Orthodox Christian battalions.
Yes, and there's that one flag that I think actually Ivan the Terrible
With the face
used,
of Christ.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
Icon.
in many ways, yes, it is a to use his words, a choose your own adventure on the front line of ideologies, so long as you're willing to do the job.
Yeah. There's just a tiny bit of news I'd like to that I missed on the last show that you and I did, Constantine. Remember, I was talking about the video a few shows back about the battalion in Ugledar, the Ukrainian battalion that was, told to try to retake certain positions.
Yes.
Even though there was, an attrition of like 90%, something like 300 had been reduced down to 30. And the commander eventually, he died after a visit by his superiors in his office. So it's uncertain whether he killed himself or they killed him. But the bit of news that I forgot to mention, near about this time, September 26th, okay, there was the 210th Battalion that was fighting in the Pokrovsk area, south of it, in Hirnik, under the command of the 59th Motorized Brigade. They worked closely with the 59th. And here it says, however, within 2 weeks, a rotation was conducted by a higher commander. The 59th was withdrawn and replaced with the 110th Mechanized. Remember, this was the same battalion or unit that was in Avdiivka that was heavily attritioned. Remember, they had hundreds of soldiers who surrendered. With the 210th Battalion reassigned to this new command, although the battalion remained in its positions, this change marked the beginning of an escalation of difficulties to the personnel. This was another, basically it was another unit that was heavily attritioned because it had to hang back in one of those pockets. Anyways, now it seems completely out of place bringing it up, but that I still haven't seen the video of that History Legends did about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
Yeah, the only one
I don't know
saw
if they will.
was his interview after the fact. I think it was with Daniel Davis, which.
Yeah, that's my only rundown of it. Honestly, I don't have time to watch. But
I'm not opposed to. I'll probably watch it at some point, but people who I trust on these issues said that it was not one of his best works.
Whose best works?
History Legends.
Oh yeah, History Legends.
Anyways, I guess we should talk about Kursk and what all this means.
How many North Koreans are in Kursk today?
We would never have struck deep if you hadn't brought in those pesky North Koreans. It's like as if that was the reason. Remember on the last show I said they're going to do the North Korean thing like because Zelensky was saying you should let us strike deep into Russia because North Koreans. Remember he was. What will you do when it's 100,000 coming across? Like, oh my God.
It really has been a propaganda boost for the pro-Ukrainian of a certain ideology. It really has. It's like proving the point of like the Asiatic hordes. But
yes.
It's like anyways, yeah, go ahead. I have some stuff to read about that, but yeah. There was this one post from a Russian Telegram channel let us recall that in September, Vladimir Putin said the long-range weapon strikes against the Russian Federation would mean NATO participation in the conflict. Yeah, that's about the long. We'll get to that, but also the North Koreans. That basically North Korea could potentially solve a lot of the Russian supply problems, and that if they have the equivalent of ATACMS missiles, it would also be a big propaganda boost for Kim Jong-un. And let's see, where is it? Yeah, and that would be a big propaganda boost. Then came the Storm Shadow and ATACMS. Remembers how the ATACMS are supposed to change everything anymore, and they didn't damage. They did damage Crimea, but it was far from critical. But then, let's see, where do they talk about the North Koreans? Yeah, but essentially that there's sort of like a win-win situation between North Korea, because it would legitimize their position in BRICS. And
Yes.
Also, like, for the Russians, I mean, let's be real here. If
the Russians don't need them. I mean, the Russians are just kind of trying
if they
to say
send them in as
we
cannon
have
fodder,
allies.
then it's like, yeah, you know, like.
I mean, has anyone brought up any credible evidence of Koreans, like, not Buryats, but like actual Koreans? Like, get real.
not
like,
at all.
Well, at the same time, they're also conducting various missile exercises off the coast, and so it is a huge flex for North Korea.
No, I do.
It is, and remember that 2 years ago, Russia gave North Korea technology, like new ICBM technology.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, they have a long-lasting partnership. They do military exercises, anyways. Like, big deal. Like, there's enough North Koreans that the Russians could refill in 10 days. Like, if they were all wiped out. Like, I don't know what. I mean, obviously, this is just propaganda. As you say, it's for national consumption of a certain ideological stripe. Of course, none of these guys have problems with South Koreans and Japanese giving them weapons,
well, no,
which they've been doing.
It's all a Korean proxy war, and I need to keep hammering this point home. But yeah. I did want to bring up one point in all seriousness. Sorry, I got to make that joke at every opportunity. And I know that we have at least one Korean who listens to the show, and he'll appreciate that. But moving on from that, I think what a lot of people have forgotten is ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, I should say, Russia has had a very strong guest worker program with North Korea, and that there have been guest workers of Korean origin, North Korean origin, throughout Russia for about the past 20, 30 years. And even at the beginning of the SMO, there were Korean laborers who were digging trench lines and building defenses. Not part of any military organization, not part of any of that, just migrant laborers who were doing construction work on the front lines. So, when I first heard this story, when they first tried to make this a thing, that's what I thought it was going to end up being. And although there's no credible evidence to any of this so far, I think any North Korean involvement in this war, beyond arms purchases, because the Russians, yes, did purchase the shells from North Korea about a year and a half ago at this point, but any North Korean nationals on the ground in the combat zone in Ukraine are there doing manual labor. That's all it is.
Yeah.
At most.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they were in Afghanistan, people remember, you know? So, like you were saying, there was always that sort of exchange between Korea and the Soviet Union. So, yeah, here's the post. Most plausible scenario. Long-range strike systems will essentially involve the use of ATACMS on troops in Kursk. Plus, it seems that the presence of North Korean forces could be very significant. Perhaps the use of some and Storm Shadows is a production center relatively close to the border. And so France is saying that they have, in Britain, have said they have greenlit the Storm Shadow system to be, used deeper into Russia. But the thing is that Trump may remove this permission, or at least partially, by its limiting the depth of the attack and leaving the limit on the use on troops. In my opinion, this is more to do with Kim than Putin. If the news about 100,000 North Korean troops is true, it basically makes the biggest limitation.
It's 100,000 now. It went from 10,000 to 100,000.
It went to 100,000. This is what the West is reporting. If it's true, then it basically makes the biggest limitation in the conflict for both sides. The number of troops no longer a problem for Russia or the Russian side. Also, it could happen what we have seen many times before. A short-term victory could become a big problem long-term, as Korea could bring a large and varied number of HIMARS/ATACMS equivalent systems, and this would force Kim to get involved further and without limitations by increasing production efforts even more if his troops start dying in the front lines by NATO hands. So,
Lots of ifs.
so apparently, correction, an anonymous U.S. official has stated it was a response to Kim's participation, very likely with the blessing of the Asian Western powers. Earlier this month, they have a joint meeting with the purpose of formulating a response to North Korea. So they said, I think this person said, Kim made a big mistake sending North Korean troops. So I don't know.
Big mistake.
And then someone said, I believe someone in the comment section in this Russian Telegram channel, that's the name Motorola, says North Korea somehow helping Russia more than the U.S. is helping Ukraine. Wasn't on my bingo card. Holy shit.
Have you checked the Wikipedia for the Ukraine war and the supporters? It has listed.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't even, like, I hardly even pay attention to this unless it's like something funny, unless somebody's made a meme of it.
Yeah.
Because,
who cares?
Because obviously, okay, the Biden's perspective on this war and how it should be fought has been to be careful, right, to say the least. And so what happens basically is, Russia makes a threat or a counter threat, and then you have the Biden administration sort of holding back. We saw this because this whole thing about attacking deep into Russia has been going on for 3 months now. Right, 3 months is a long
really
time.
A year, actually, when you think about it.
Right, yeah. Right. But like in a concerted effort of constantly talking about it, constantly being in the news, it has been a solid 3 months, right?
Yeah.
And so, I guess he doesn't have to worry about that anymore, right? If he does this, of course, it will screw up Trump's ability to, negotiate a settlement. Trump cannot negotiate a settlement, but they're afraid of him and they're afraid of what he might concede. Okay. In any case, right? Like, he won with an enormous popular mandate, and that can't be ignored. So I guess what I'm not articulating this very well, but it, the Biden administration has always been actually very considerate about the amount of damage that Russia, not necessarily attacking NATO, but what Russia could do to Ukraine in response. Now, the whole purpose of this cynical action basically is to attack the Kursk nuclear power plant. That's what I think this is about. Before we go any further, the Germans are not going to supply Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. And let's be honest, like, the targeting, the data, the missiles, everything will be handled by NATO military. It's not going to be done by Ukraine.
And let's just cut to the chase. It's going to be handled by the Pentagon, because no other country in NATO has the capability to do that.
That's right. So, so the target acquisition cannot happen because Ukraine doesn't have satellites, right? Everything will have to be done by the U.S. It's kind of like the HIMARS. And by the way, yesterday another HIMARS was destroyed. Many of probably the staff of the HIMARS units are, I would say, a goodly amount are still Americans. Now they probably have had, after 2 years of training, where the Ukrainians can pilot these things, but that's what Russia's concern is like, this is something Ukraine can't do. You know it. I know it. You're getting involved in the war now in a very direct way, and that's why this is happening. Of course, Italy has also said that they won't, and today, in the press briefing, America has not confirmed or denied that that they have given the okay for the ATACMS. Now, the ATACMS can reach about 300 to 350 kilometers. I believe the Storm Shadows can do about 500. But again, the Germans are not going to supply them because it would have to be German staffed, like, to do this. The Ukrainians haven't been trained, and this was always questionable. It's not about giving, like, the West in this case is not supplying bullets. They're not supplying M16s. They're not. It's nothing like that. It's on a totally different magnitude, and we'll see what happens. But my guess is, like, the reason why the Ukrainians went into Kursk, no matter what it's cost them in Donbass, is to stage an attack in the nuclear power plant. This was always the goal, and now this is what they will do, because in these months past, the Russians have had some painful lessons, like the HIMARS attack on that convoy, which killed at least 100 men. They're not going to. Their forces are much more dispersed, and frankly, like, the Ukrainians, it's not just their forces and the concentration of the forces have had to be remanaged, but at the same time, they cannot be as obvious about where they're stationing them in the local, in the towns further away from the battlefield. So that leaves civilians, and the Ukrainians have no compunction about holding them back to attack Russian civilians. They did it with Belgorod for a year, and that's what this would be for, right? Like, even U.S. commentators have said, like, if we make the Russians hurt the way the Ukrainians have hurt, then it's a bargaining tape. It's going to be used for bargaining. But the Russians have been dealing with ATACMS for a long time, on Crimea and so forth. So, yeah.
Well, apparently Putin said that when it comes to the use of high precision, long range weapons of Western manufacture, it is a completely different story. The Ukrainian army is not capable of striking with modern high precision, long range systems of Western manufacture, cannot do this. That is state explained. Therefore, is not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is a question of making the decision about whether NATO countries are directly involved in military conflict, because, I believe Putin further explains, the satellite imagery and information intel used feeding into these missile systems is provided by NATO. The Ukrainians do not have that satellite capability. So it essentially mean that it was like not Ukraine, like Ukraine is just like the sort of like the veneer of it. It's really NATO striking into Russia.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as I always said, they do not want to go in. Definitely not at this stage. They do not want to go into a land battle with Russia in Ukraine. If they did, their production, there would have been a mobilization of their industry at the very least, right? Like, the Ukrainian armed forces are bigger than the French and the French and the British put together. So they're not going to do that. And I always said that they would need to commit to a quick strike force that had maximal damage, that could intimidate the Russians to see it their way. Because, of course, there's a lot of companies that invested trillions of dollars into Ukraine. BlackRock, Shell, Halliburton,
Lockheed Martin.
all these companies have trillions of dollars worth of investment poured into Ukraine,
and that's
particularly in the Donbass and Zaporozhye. Yeah, and so, who's going to pay them? It's another reason why this war is also being fought. 1/3 of all the gas reserves in Ukraine are all in the Donbass area, right? The most fertile soil stretches from Kherson all the way, into some of the areas of southern Donbass. So the entire part of Zaporozhye. Now there are parts of southern Ukraine on the other side of the Dnieper that also have this, black soil. But this is what major U.S. corporations are, and some British ones. I think BP is another one that made heavy investments, and of course all the gas and oil off the coast of Crimea, right? So I'm guessing that like if they go through with this, that's what it'll be for. It would have to be quick, decisive, total intimidation. I don't think the Russians are going to be intimidated. I think, and like I say, no matter what some representative from the Russians, Putin himself has not said it, but it doesn't even matter whether it's Peskov or Lavrov. No matter what they say, the first that's going to be punished for this will be Ukraine. Like we haven't seen the kind of aerial bombardment of Ukraine, that kind that you see the Israelis committing on a daily basis in Lebanon and Gaza, right? I if they blew up the nuclear power plant in Kursk or killed like 100 civilians, it would be like, honestly, it, it would be an easy decision for Putin. He would know that if he wanted any kind of legacy that would remain after him, if he wanted to remain in power, he would have to retaliate in a very, very brutal way, and Ukraine would be the first to suffer.
Yeah.
I can't really add much else to that, and I don't. I have a hard time imagining the situation for a number of reasons. First of which is just the cataclysmic effects that would have if we were to see something like this. I mean, even knocking out Ukraine's power grid would not suffice in a situation like that. And that
No, it wouldn't.
I don't think it would amount to, say, the levels of the Israelis in Gaza. But as I've said many times since the start of this war, if the Russians showed as little, if the Russians showed as little restraint as the Israelis did in Gaza, or even just, I don't know, say, did what, I don't know, 10% of what the Israelis did in Gaza, you would have had a NATO intervention within months. And
Yeah.
I do think
Yeah.
that's another risk, and that might be the game the Ukrainians are trying to play. That might be Zelensky's calculations, where if I cause such a cataclysmic event where I blow up Kursk power plant, or if I hit a large civilian target and that leads to casualties within the triple digits or whatever, the Russians will respond. It's gonna hurt, but that is going to accomplish my goal of escalating this war and turning it into by every definition, a continental war. And
Yeah, but but is the average normie like that? Oh, why am I even asking this? I know the truth. The average normie is that retarded because,
Yeah.
if you goad Russia into a massive engagement on Kiev, for example, and then that gives NATO the pretext to invade, and it causes World War III. Like, are there still going to be like Nafoids and other like Western libtards that are like, well, Russia had it coming, and
Yeah, that's
we
what
might have
that's
to.
what they'll say.
Yeah, we might have to like eat fucking sawdust bread like in Stalingrad because of the what do they call it during the World War II? The rationing. But it's like, no, but that's what I mean. Like, it's ridiculous. But yeah, sorry I cut you off, Constantine. That's
no, it's fine. But it does remind me. I'll need to see if I can find it. It was circulating around the beginning of the war. It was an actual good political cartoon, believe it or not, of a group of people sitting in a cave around a fire, and it says, "At least we made Russia suffer for a few years." And it's just like completely
Oh,
poor, destitute, post-apocalypse situation. But yeah, just like, at least we owned Russia for a little bit, and that is the mindset of a lot of these people. And especially when war propaganda kicks into full gear, you might say that these people are the keyboard warriors, whatever. Yeah, the NAFOIs probably wouldn't be the ones on the front lines, but there's going to be a lot of otherwise reasonable people who get talked into
oh
either
yeah,
either
definitely.
going along with the conscription effort or outright volunteering. And there's probably going to be
Yeah.
actually a lot of very good people who feel some sort of civic or national duty to their nation when they do get that call in order to go get their lives quite literally destroyed in Ukraine. And
Yeah, I might
it's
go on a limb, but go ahead. Go ahead.
and it's going to be an absolute disaster if it gets to that point. And for full disclosure, I do not think it's going to get to that point. What it looks like right now, my read on the situation, I don't think Biden did this on purpose, but I do think he did it, of course, to sabotage Trump and to make it a difficult transition, especially on the front of foreign policy. But effectively, what he authorized was enough to anger the Russians, but not lead to any sort of material advantage for Ukraine, in which case it will just incur retaliation. And I don't think the retaliation will reach the level where we see any sort of major escalation from the outside world.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, Russia has dealt with ATACMS in Crimea and, in the new territories for well over a year now, and they've been very successful overall knocking them out. I mean, that's why you hardly. When was the last time there was an ATACMS attack by Ukraine? Right now, there was a naval officer that was killed in a kind of IRA type terrorist attack in Crimea in Sevastopol. But I mean, they've that's sort of the only kind of success that they've had. I literally I don't know when was the last time, like UAVs, yeah, smashing into like energy grids in pre-war Russia, yeah, that still happens from time to time, or hitting an oil field, yeah, yeah, but they're UAVs. Most of these, damage to the facilities are repaired. It's not slowing down Russia. So what would the attackers do? Like, maybe the threat of them attacking Kursk is what will divide Russia's attention, and the attackers attack, I don't know, Crimea or somewhere else in the Donbass. Um, so it could be that kind of strategy as well that's being played out. But I'll go out on a limb. I think if Ukraine was crazy enough to attack the nuclear power plant, which I think they are, because I think in October they tried to attack the one in Zaporozhye again. But if they felt so cornered that is what they would have to do, right? And Russia retaliated, I don't think the West would enforce any kind of conscription. I just don't see it.
Oh no.
I think we might see Western troops go into Western Ukraine and then form a line about, like, you can't go any further or else, blah blah blah.
Yeah, they would
But
implement the Macron
we're
plan.
not going to see a conscription and war mobilization and war footing coming from any Western nation, least of all from the U.S. That's not going to happen.
I completely agree, and I think we've talked about this at length, where especially in the United States, I think a conscription drive would be enough to push a lot of the aggravating social factors to the brink and lead to
Yeah.
a large degree
Yeah.
of societal breakdown. But with that being said, if there were to be any
Well,
sort of expeditionary force, it would be volunteers. It would be, I mean, maybe the recruitment ads might get a little whiter and a little more masculine, but I think that's probably you're already seeing that right now, but that's the extent in which it would go to. They would quote unquote
Yeah.
put the woke away. The
Please,
military
please.
would the military would look like it did right after 9/11, and you're right, they would go into it to enforce some sort of demilitarized zone, like the plan that was floated around by some of the European leadership, actually in the light of Trump's victory. But it wouldn't go beyond that because, number one, I don't think the spirit is there. As much as many people in the West may have bought into the line and may despise Russia for that reason, they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is. They're not willing to put their life on the
No.
line for that. Number two, just I think simple industrial capacity. The West is not at a state in which could keep up. Even if they wanted to engage, there would need to be a Herculean reindustrialization effort across the West. And we talked about this previously.
Yeah.
And that,
Look what's happening in Germany.
yeah,
Look at Schulz's government.
yeah, and that's not something that can happen overnight. And frankly, with how much things have fallen into frankly disrepair across the West, not only in Europe but also the United States, it would probably be a decades-long effort to get back to the industrial superpower status that we once enjoyed. If we were to even
That's
try
why
to
they
do
would
anything
want to
like that.
freeze it, because
Absolutely.
they would want time. They want a Minsk 3. They want to freeze the conflict in order to regroup and rearm. That's all
Well,
this is.
But that's
But if
also
Russia
like,
keeps applying the pressure, that's not going to happen.
yeah. But that's also like also predicated on Trump not doing anything, whereas you can only hope that like with JD Vance and Tulsi Gabbard, who are implicit Zers, that like, I mean, who knows? They're not like implicit Vadniks or whatever. It's just like what retarded liberals think. But like,
Yeah.
that's no, but definitely they do have an incentive to pursue at least negotiations, whether that becomes like a Minsk III. So like, like the Tronzy world order, the transnational progressive world order, they're like, okay, well, it's only 4 more years, and hopefully Trump doesn't do too much damage to the institutions, and maybe in 4 more years we'll get like another Obama-esque like humanitarian quote unquote interventionist, and we could just like spark the whole thing up again, and like history will end again, and like we'll put history away, and Trumpism will be no more because he'll fuck things up so badly. Like this is what these people like the
Yeah.
ones who aren't like overtly doom, like their equivalent of like blue and on or doom posting. That's what they're saying. They're like, okay, we'll just like withstand another 4 years of Trumpism, and then we could go back to business as usual. And by that time, hopefully Vladimir Putin will be too old. And but here's the thing, though. This is one thing that people don't bank on. At least like Western libtards don't bank on this, because they don't really know, like they don't really know what's going on in Eastern Europe, right? There's this post by again another Russian Telegram group saying that in terms of like ideology, now whether this pans out or not, or whether this sort of like Fukuyama end of history thesis is correct, which I don't think it is, but still. But let's say it isn't correct for argument's sake. Now, in Russia and Ukraine, who is going to be left? Okay. Now, here's the thing: Soviet nostalgism, that dies with the boomers in Russia. The libtards, they're going to move to the West. Who's left? Ultra far right nationalists on both sides. And so they're so like wholesome chungus, we're going to import democracy to Ukraine. It's not going to happen when Azov controls Ukraine. And it's not going to happen when far right battalions that are being radicalized in Russia, like in the war on the Russian side as we speak, right, is evidenced by the more like youth orientated like Russian Telegram channels. They're like fucking weebs, but they're also like they're into like esoteric far right paganism a lot. But also this post says not only in Russia are you going to have the esoteric far right pagans, you're also going to have, ironically enough, alongside them, the Cossack and the ultra-Orthodox right-wing nationalists as well. Yeah. So you're going to have like in Eastern Europe, it's going to buck the trend of like Western civilization from the end of the World War II onwards with the boomers, where like youth generations create more left-wing conditions as time goes on. Actually, in huge parts of the West, if you want to see Trump and what's going to happen in Canada, hopefully, and in Eastern Europe, that trend is reversing. Younger people are going to be markedly more right-wing than in Eastern European example, their retarded boomer Soviet irredentist, grandparents, or their retarded Gen X libtard cousins.
I'm
right?
Glad,
so yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because although he didn't have the context to put it in much detail as you did, I do think it touches on Nixon's point around the fall of the Soviet Union, where if Russia is not integrated, if there's not a reconciliation with Russia and the former Soviet states, and we work out a comprehensive agreement of how to move forward, that you will create a new Russian nationalist movement, and that you will get this result, and that there will be war in Eastern Europe, and that there will be enmity between Russia and these former Soviet states at a certain point that can only be solved by force of arms.
Yeah, imagine like the former Yugoslavian wars, but like 10 times bigger, right? Like those were all like ultra nationalist far right forces. Like whether it was, let's not get into the Bosnian War, but like let's not get into what happened there. But you know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, sorry, Constantine, go ahead. Yeah.
No, but I'm glad you brought that up, because, like I said, it touches on almost all the same points that Nixon made upon the fall of the Soviet Union, that a lot of people made upon the fall of the Soviet Union, is that if this is a once in several generations moment in order to secure a lasting peace on the continent, because look, World War II, that was all squared away. We have the end of the Cold War. The other power block in the world, the other world superpower, has fallen, and we can either build something new off of that. We can either have a new Europe, which for a time was developing. Look at the political dynamics, the geopolitical dynamics around the Iraq War, where France and Germany very much opposed, the Russians opposed. And even up until, I would say, the 2008 Bucharest summit of NATO, where the Russians were making inroads in Europe, where Putin was on very good terms with somebody like Schroeder and Chirac in France. And that was all scuttled. It was unacceptable for the Atlanticists, both in the Anglosphere and on the continent, that this kind of relationship would be able to develop. And that is the crux of, I would say, the war in Ukraine going all the way back to 2014, is that this was going to be the wedge at which they divided continental Europe from Russia for fear of some sort of lasting cooperation between the two.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I mentioned earlier about all the companies that want in Ukraine, like you could see how 1/3 of all gas going into Europe would come from Ukraine. You could see how it becomes, a breadbasket for Europe as well, right? Much to the chagrin of, let's say, Polish farmers. But that was ultimately the plan, right? Where Russia has no export, no trade with Europe. Europe gets the goodies from its region and region of influence. And then later you can work on a demoralized Russia, and hopefully it falls and balkanizes, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, the war was an effort to speed that up.
Yes.
Yeah.
In
But
which
that's not going to happen.
they conversely accomplished the exact opposite, and that somebody, I can't remember who had pointed this out, but the dreams of Ukrainian nationalists have conversely led to the hopes and aspirations of Russian nationalists starting to come true. That Russia, once again, is seeing economic growth to the rate which has not seen in decades. It is an industrial power again. Its military is now world class, is one of the most battle-hardened militaries in the world, and that maybe not in a 28 versus 1 competition with NATO to win, but there are countries that it could, not without struggle, could best militarily, and that they had the combat experience, and that they are able to export this combat experience, that they had the military industry, and that they are once again a full-fledged great power. Maybe not quite a superpower, but they are a full-fledged great power that has global influence. The president of Russia can make phone calls. He can make things happen with dozens of nations across the world.
Yeah. And also, like I mentioned Dugin before, these Russian nationalists, they don't jive with, they don't cop that jive of like the whole like some Chungus third worldism, like even like the stuff that Putin entertains is like another issue.
I mean, there were six different officials in Russia were recently arrested.
Yeah.
For creating conditions of mass migration.
There you go.
I'm trying to, sorry, as I'm talking, I'm trying to find this article.
The only wild card I could see is that Putin is getting old. He is a boomer. And is he a boomer? Or is he like more closer to Gen X? I forget.
I know he's a boomer.
Yeah,
he's a boomer. Yeah. So the only wild card would be what happens after Putin if he were to expire in the next 10 to 15 years.
Oh, yes. And
yeah, that would be the big question hanging in the air.
I think the question of succession is valid, but they said the same thing after Stalin. They've been saying the same thing about Russia for centuries.
They said the same thing after Brezhnev.
Once he falls, who's going to succeed him? And my theory about that is, when it comes to Putin's successor, I can't give you a name. Now I know for the longest time a lot of people said it would have been Medvedev, even though I think he's been relegated to a different role, an important role, but a different role.
He doesn't seem like a leader type like Putin does.
No, I completely agree. But with that, I do think, number one, for the pretense of quote-unquote democracy, while all these nations ought to pretend to be democratic, he's not going to outright state his successor. It's going to be something that is ambiguous, so it maybe not for inside Russia, but for the sake of international reputation, it looks like the will of the people decided. Secondly, that's not somebody you want to put out there, because he's going to be target number one, probably even more than Putin at that point. And
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You
not
would
to
never. Yeah.
not to equate the two too much, but part of the reason why Franco's regime collapsed almost immediately upon his death was, I can't remember his name, but the successor that he had to be prime minister to the restored king was actually assassinated by Basque separatists in 1973.
Yeah.
In which case, while you
Mm.
did have the throne, it was going to have power, but it was going to be largely symbolic. But we saw that there was a transition of democracy. I think that was Juan Carlos, whatever his regnal number was. It escapes me at the moment. But point being is, the man who was supposed to be his right hand in his ear advising him was assassinated in 1973. The next Franco didn't even get a chance to take power.
Yeah. That was a glowy op too, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. That was. Are the Basques still like libtarded communists? Or are they?
I think so. I just don't think they're really that relevant today. I think the Catalonians control that attention.
Sort of like Quebec separatism. It's like nobody cares anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like basically it's an ideology that they piggyback off of that they think will be able to liberate them, partly because, like, the hegemon over them has already adopted it anyways. So it's an argument, like it's a purity argument. Like I don't think they actually believe in it. This may be something worth mentioning. I don't. They're not like, how can I put it? They're not ideologically married to it the way, let's say, post 1848 and onwards, various ideologues were married to it, and revolutions basically were occurring all throughout Europe.
Yeah.
So it's really not the same thing.
Well, I think like there is a general exhaustion within the sort of bulk of transnational progressivism, and I think that the election of Trump really is sort of a sign of people rejecting outright at least the excesses of that, and people wanting to seek some alternative. Now, this is, of course, like you never, you know what I mean? Like you never can really guess where Trump is going to go. You hope for the best, but at least in part that's a sign that people are sort of experiencing this like immense ideological exhaustion with the prevailing politics, at least after the Cold War. But I think that, and again, yeah, Kondylis talks about this with planetary politics after the Cold War. But I think that you will see when people say, like, okay, when libs in the media, they say like the rise of the far right in the world, what they mean is the rise of counter ideologies to the sort of like mainstay end of history libtard norm that has been prevalent for at least 30 or 40 years now. So it would be coded as right wing, because all forms of like nationalism or separatism or so forth at least has some sort of like, let's call, what did Bowden call it, revolutionary conservatism. But at the end of the day, even ideologies on the left that wish to break free, they really can't, because you have to realize that right-wing ideology is more rhizomatic because of the hegemon that we live under.
Yes.
It's more fractured, it's able to breathe ideologically or discursively. Whereas if any ideology on the left, from communism onwards, as much as they like to say that they're different, when you really look at the core tenets of leftism, right? Like, let's go to the famous anime poster Gens. Remember that tweet? You can be a bloodthirsty capitalist and a neoliberal, and you can be pro-corporation, but you can't go against gay race communism. You can't go against race idolatry. You can't go against LGBT CIA. Those are the real tenets of leftism. So, in other words, if you're a communist or if you're a syndicalist or if you are some kind of like liberal or some kind of like whatever, like weirdo, situationist and prim, whatever, right? Like choose your own ideology on the political left. It doesn't really matter because the core thing of leftism are those things. You are always in agreement. Whereas on the political right, you can have all sorts of flavors of nationalism and ideology and separatism and irredentism, and it is by definition something that is grabastic and rhizomatic and operates horizontally instead of vertically. We're in a weird position where leftism, for the first time in 100 years, well, maybe they've always been this way, but you never know. Like for the first time, but for argument's sake, is something that is vertical, is something that is overtly rigid and hierarchical, and is essentially what Deleuze would call the state model, right? Whereas on the political right, you have this potential. And in Eastern Europe, to go back to that post I read from a Russian Telegram channel that I will not name, you have a weird situation where on both sides of the war, the younger people, their ideologies are essentially the same, but for different countries. Or at least they're not the same, but they have a similar character, but have different flavors, whether you're like some weirdo pagan that has all the accoutrements of runes and spinny wheels, or you're, an Eastern Orthodox that happens to share the same politics as that pagan, or at least similar, right? Either way, like Soviet irredentism or like boomer libtardation does not factor into the dreams and imaginations of an Azovite or of like a Cossack Orthodox, Orthodox battalion person. So Eastern Europe is not going to be the mainstay of politics that happened within the later half of the 20th century and the early half of the 21st century, where these countries integrate within the planetary politics of the West, by definition become more liberal, become more, quote unquote, open to foreign markets, which means they're more open to getting graped by foreign corporations. So they're really bucking the trend. And a lot of places in the world are bucking this trend as well.
Yeah.
I can't comment on the politics of Africa or a lot of Asian nations, but for example, Bhutan still has a very young and attractive monarchy, and so they haven't been color revolution yet. So I don't know.
India, for all its faults, has fully embraced Hindu nationalism, and that's certainly a departure.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will just draw everyone's attention. These are the 6 arrested officials on screen. Just for, they look like the kind of people you'd expect them to be. But as you were saying,
is that woman a wood? Is she a wood?
First thing Geo is gonna say is she a wood? Oh my god.
But those guys at the top, they don't look like the typical like multiculturalist, but I guess you never know.
No, they're not, because they're basically traitors. They're basically trying to
they got paid off by somebody, right? Yeah.
They're not. I mean, yeah, exactly, right. They're making huge gobs of money by giving instant worker permits or whatever other illegal, forged documents for these guys to be in there, right?
Yeah, I mean the names are all pretty Russian. There's nothing that sticks out ethnically, but I mean they just look shifty. I'll just put it that. Regardless of ethnicity, they look shifty. They look smarmy. But I digress.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say to maybe to add on to what you're saying, Gio, is the Western model, right? The international model that you were talking about is based on the evolution of liberalism. And so liberalism has contained within it, since Hobbes, this idea that, the reason we have civilization is to prevent like an all versus all. You see this also with Schmidt, right? But can I put it? I guess what people dislike about Dugin is to some level, and I think much of it is unconscious, is this still belief in some kind of liberalism in order to keep the peace.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That where does, like, because of course civilization takes care of this kind of random violence that can occur not living in one, right? So there's always a question of security, and of course the evolution of liberal thought is it's been talked to death ever since 2016. Jolly Heretic constantly talks about the left is mainly harm avoidance, right?
Yeah.
But so within these philosophies, right, there's always a kind of how much liberalism should we keep, right?
Yeah.
And the thing with Eastern Europe is it doesn't really have a history of liberalism. It has a history of patterning itself off more developed nations that already had developed liberalism, right? But it is not theirs. Their existence has been largely not reactionary, but reactionary in the sense that they are following along. But the reactionary content is still there. You can still see it as you were talking about, right? And this is what fundamentally scares the West, is that Eastern Europe is still rich and rife with this. And it's why it has to be subjugated, right? Because of course, never again, we're never going to have that kind of war again, or we're never going to have this quote unquote event again. So I would say that there is still like the persistence of liberalism within much, philosophical thought about how its bona fide is still there, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So you have exceptions, right? Like when the liberal is permitted to attack in order to preserve liberalism, but that's not the same thing as being anti-liberal, right?
Yeah.
And like one of the faults with which the West finds Russia is that it is not this. It has never been this. It is why Russia is not, like, in many respects, an Eastern European nation, because it would be subjugated by now, or it would have asked to be subjugated, because it simply just doesn't have the strength to assert itself, either culturally or militarily or economically. But Russia does, and that's what makes a difference. This is why, for them, Russia is always potentially something. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right wing. For them, it's like it's their fear that it's an antidote for liberalism, right? And it's ironic that like Putin was not radically anti-liberal ever. After Yeltsin, he simply didn't want a country to disintegrate. But again, what you have working against him, which pushed him more towards the right, besides Dugin, which he did. Whether you believe it or not, like, I don't believe Dugin and Putin talk to each other, obviously, right? But somewhere along the way, someone in his staff is going to, because basically what Putin is doing is what Dugin wanted him to do 10 years ago, particularly with reference to Ukraine, and what he saw were the shortcomings of a Russian ideology, or a non-existent Russian ideology. And so, I've discussed this before, that that some of the think tanks, these were not public think tanks, that eventually Putin would be connected to in the mid 90s, late 90s, especially after Prokofiev, is that we're going to go liberal, but with a slight nationalist bent. But if you push us, we're going to go more nationalist. And that was, and again, neither or, right? The liberalism is not homegrown. It is absorbed. They're trying to work it out. They think this is what they have to do, at least some segment of their elites, in order to get along and go along. And then, as of course the West wants a more total subjugation, that's when the nationalism comes out, and that is when, like, the real identity surfaces.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like, I mean, it's well, Russia's unique because it has so much ties to Western Europe and by extension the Anglosphere as a whole. Whereas I think like apart from like some like weirdo MAGA communists or like even like some like ironically enough some neocon war hawks like China hawks, China doesn't really present an ideological threat to the West because their society is like a very dour, fake, bugman type of society, and they really it's not really attractive for like outside Westerners, especially.
Well,
unless you're some like
it's
weirdo like
inscrutable, as
logo
they always
dataless.
say.
Yeah. Well, what did you say?
I mean, it's for many Westerners, Asian society has always been inscrutable. Like, no matter how many Westerners visit Japan and say how much they like it, there is this wall, there is this separation.
Yeah.
Like it's still there. It is a totally different. No, it's a different planet. It's them. It's not us.
Yeah.
And
for
like,
some reason,
and
China.
really, so what? So what?
Yeah.
And I mean, the Chinese don't want to be us, and we don't want to be them. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
I think apart from ancient China and their traditions, I don't really see that form of Western exoticism and Orientalism that you have, say, in Japan with like, you know, weeaboo culture, or even certain forms of Buddhism, or Tibet, or even India. Now in Canada, let's not talk about Indians in Canada, but
oh no.
But still, like historically, like you had like fucking Timothy Leary going to India and so forth, and you know, whereas China, their form of Orientalism is more of like a past historical thing. And to be fair, as much as I don't like the CCP, they have like, at least in terms of tourist trap, they have like, for example, allowed like traditional carvers to erect monuments and traditional printmakers and artists and so forth. And so they do have like that form of Orientalism. But for some reason, Japan and even India clings more to, or even into China with their various like Mahayana Buddhist traditions, that clings more closely to sort of like Western New Ageism and exoticism than it does like with China, the way that China currently, like nobody, unless you're like some weirdo MAGA communist or logo datalist or, nobody like really fetishizes. I mean, maybe in the 2010s there was a trend actually of like very suspicious people in the media who are like, well, maybe the Chinese have a few things right. But really, like when you look at daily life in major Chinese cities, nobody's like in the West is like really seriously fetishizing that the way that people fetishize living in Tokyo, or even certain people fetishize living near the Varanasi Ghats, right? Like it's not. And you're right. Those people are them. They're not us. Russia is closer to us than any of the other BRIC nations. Maybe apart from South Africa. Well, not South Africa, but like, well, maybe Brazil. Actually, Brazil.
Well, if you're comparing America, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Brazil is different because Brazil is like a heavily Americanized country because all those people love America. They love American culture. They have this thing about America. I want to get plastic surgery so I can move to America one day. But in terms of like all the core BRIC nations, in terms of the traditions and engagement with Western Europe, I mean, Russia takes the cake. It's not even close.
Yeah. It's yeah.
Brazil's like in a lot of ways a little Potemkin village of American culture, but that's. I'm not bashing it. My mother, born and raised in Sao Paulo, so I have a right to say it. Okay, I have my Brazilian passport. Actually, I have a right to say it. So I'm not bashing it. I'm just saying that's the way it is. That's the way Brazilians are.
I worked with a Brazilian girl for 2 years.
Yeah.
She had to move back because she had problems with her visa.
Yeah.
The main problem was she wasn't from India. Anyhow, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
So she had to move back. Young girl, like she was fresh out of college and so on. And I mean, very sweet girl, don't get me wrong, but total lib. Like she honestly, she just dressed and acted like, any Kamala or Obama supporter
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like anyone. But to be honest, though, she was also far more down to earth than them. Like exterior wise, the piercings, the dyed hair, like she looked like them.
Yeah.
But she was far more realistic. You could have conversations with her, which borderlined on right wing, just like some talking
Oh,
points
I've heard a lot of these stories off air,
that
and even some on air.
I could never have. I could never have that kind of conversation with an actual like
Western educated, Western born
Western,
and
not
raised
just Western
libtard.
educated, but Western origin, like an Anglo-Westoid,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
an Anglo-leftoid.
Yeah.
Like those people would conspire to have me fired.
Well, the
Like,
thing is,
like,
with Brazil, yeah, go ahead, Gordon. Yeah.
no, that's it.
Well, I was going to say, like, the thing is with Brazilians is that they get very caught up in the aesthetic surface level of Western culture. So a lot of them, they act like they're libtards. They
This is
don't
what I mean
like,
about pseudo metamorphosis. This is what I mean about a country
yeah,
adopting the metaphysics, the symbol, the spirit of a completely foreign nation. It is not
exactly.
them, right? They will always have this um, duality to them.
Yeah, exactly. Like what Spengler called the moonlight civilizations. But like, for example, you'll have Brazilians, like, they really hate Trump, they really hate Bolsonaro, they love Lula, but they'll at the same time say like the most homophobic thing that
Yeah.
no libtard, or the most racist thing
Yes.
actually, that like no libtard would ever say in the West.
That's kind of like what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Like Lula, I mean, it's different because like Lula definitely always had the backing of Western libtards, because there was, like, for example, a lot of Delizians that went to Brazil in the 80s, and they thought like Lula was going to be like the revolutionary vanguard. A lot of Marxists went there. But Brazil has a lot of problems. You'd figure like Brazil would be like actually a pretty good case study for Marxism, but it just doesn't work that way. Like, those people, they have too much. There's a lot of like nationalist sentiments in Brazil that prevent them from like going like full on Marxism, and like that just like that enervates Western libs and like Western Marxist academics like nothing else. The fact that like Lula pretended to be this revolutionary vanguard, but yet still gave into the typical corrupt politics of the day in Brazil. You have to remember that under Lula's administration in the 90s, like, he cracked down harder on drug gangs and poor people than even like the subsequent, like, or the previous like right-wing administrations. So, I mean, it is what it is. But Brazil is a different case, and it is like in a lot of ways a moonlight civilization to America, but only the aesthetic trappings of it. And how do you buy into the monoculture of the West? You become crazy for Coconut Kamala or something like that. And Trump is evil.
And the friend that I'm talking about, remember, she looked like but she never was. She laughed at her. She thought she was an idiot. So, like I say, the outward trappings, yes, but internally things were more nuanced.
Yeah, but I think like really the threat of Russia, because I remember it was one of these bigger right-wing accounts on Twitter. I think it was 9mm or 8mm or whatever, 9mm, that tweeted like the sort of like sheer amount of normie sadism that like Nafoids and liberals post against Russia, and how it like doesn't make any sense, because you'd figure they want to like, free themselves of the dialectic of the Cold War that was largely fought by neocons. But when you think of it, I mean, this is pretty obvious. This isn't like a nuclear galaxy brain take, but like the thought of having a power next to Western Europe that is at least nominally right-wing in the sense of not liberal terrifies the transnational progressive regime like nothing else. And I think like it terrifies them more than China not having a quote unquote liberal politics. Now, a lot of the changelings in China actually are kind of like libtards. And China does have a very oppressive, like a society that nobody in the West would really want to live in, right? But I think like it's different because they're a whole other. To have people that, I mean, okay, apart from like apart from like fucking Telegram Wignat memes that they look like they're Asiatic and they're mongrels or whatever, the average white Russian looks very similar or exactly like a Western European. And the fact that they would have a politics that is not liberalism,
Yeah,
really terrifies the regime.
it terrifies them, kind of like in a body snatcher kind of way, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
And they're the other thing, of course, that they're always worried about is Russia's sort of preeminence amongst other Slavic nations and how they can influence them.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, just everybody, like,
even Ukraine, you have to realize before this war, there was, like you said at the beginning of the program, there was always news articles about, oh, I know we give them funding and I know we support them, but like, oh, there's this dangerous far right element in Ukraine, and they were the ones at the head of Maidan, and it's like, what happens if they take over the country? Well, they probably will take over the fucking country. So it's like, like,
yeah, I mean, the U.S. would never allow that to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, they only want them there as long as they're fighting Russia. This is, and I think NAFOids intuitively understand this, but
oh yeah, definitely.
Like, I think, as I said earlier about liberalism, right? There's fighting for anything, there's negating liberal values in order to preserve liberalism. And then there is something totally different to that, which is having something to die for, irrespective of liberalism, in an even rejection of liberalism as a prior, right?
Exactly.
And they're like, that's just not going to emerge. Like, there have to be certain preconditions for that to reemerge in Europe, and that would mean that America would have to become significantly weaker, because no matter what Trump will do or won't do, it cannot come until America has become much weaker and has less influence in Europe. And what they're most afraid of is that when and if that happens, Russia might be the place where people find inspiration for that kind of thinking. The West has always been afraid of this, like during the Soviet era and after. And like I say, amongst, like, I mean, especially amongst like Orthodox Slavic people, there's a kind of a preeminence about Russia.
Yeah.
Like every other Slavoid is just, it belongs to some puppet regime in the West, but Russia doesn't. And so, there's something inspiring and alluring about that,
Yeah. Well, even like Ukraine, I think Ukraine also is like a repository for right-wing sentiments among a certain population of Western people in the political right. And I think that,
but it's only as a counter to Russia.
Yeah, true.
It doesn't like, it has nothing to do with anything else. Like, and all that effort is strictly within liberalism, do anything to, like, ultimately it will act as a protector of liberalism.
Yeah.
That is how, that's operationally how it works, and that's its raison d'etre. It's not because, I mean, if they were really sincere about it, they wouldn't be supporting a guy that's trying to bring in gay marriage into Ukraine. Like,
yeah.
I mean, in Ukraine too, and in the West, you can live in whatever kind of ideological bubble you want to live in. You're welcome to it.
But the monoculture above you, or rather the anti-civilization force, is totally against you. Yeah. And so I think, there are like Western white nationalists that say, well, if Ukrainians can have these far right battalions and they can have their fight against for their own nation, why can't we have that? But it's like, okay, who are you going to fight against? Who are you going to fight against? It's kind of like
you're
going to fight against America if you're in Europe.
Yeah.
So, you're not going to fight against the Chinese. So
it's kind of like every 007 film, right? Like, he's a white conservative guy, and like he literally fights for everything he fights on behalf of everything that's is interested against him.
Yeah.
Like, that's what like right-wing militias in Ukraine are about. Like, they're so utterly, I can never respect them because of just how stupid they are. And of course, don't worry, once we defeat Russia, we'll fix all of this. Oh yeah, you'll fix all of this. Yeah, because you're generating the money, because like they didn't give you the money to play in this fantasy land of yours. You created that all on your own. Like, it's
They
bizarre.
gave
It's
us
stupid.
money to start. They gave us money to erect statues of Bandera. Like, no, it's not. Like, okay, I want to be impartial, and I want to say that there are a lot of Ukrainian nationalists that are fighting for what they believe in, and that is inherently an honorable thing. But unfortunately, I do think that they are being led down this primrose path, like you were saying, and a lot of them may have some kind of fantasy that, well, if America supports us now, then we should, maybe one day we'll kick out Zelensky and he'll have his little villa in the north of France, and we can just like live in our society where we get to determine our own values. But
No, that's
historically,
never
it
going to
never,
happen.
yeah, historically, it just never works that way.
No,
Yeah.
there's too much. There's so much foreign investment that will never happen. They have a debt they can never repay.
Yeah.
It will never happen.
Well, their resources have to get great.
They'll be completely permanently captured, and they will have to depend on another force external to the West that can threaten the West, that can weaken the West, for those dissident elements to rise to the top.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, this is so historical. Like, I mean, there's so many historical examples of this. I guess you have to be kind of really young not to see that, not to understand that. But
what would happen if like the war stops and they do throw off the Kiev regime and these nationalist far-right battalions basically give the West the middle finger? What do you think would happen? I mean, I couldn't even fathom that. I mean, that would be
no, it would
bad.
not happen. Every right-wing battalion knows where it gets its bread and butter from.
Yeah.
And some of them were started by Jewish oligarchs anyways, like Azov. So like RDK, that other, so-called like Russian dissident. The guy is half Jewish. He's Jewish on his mom's side. So
isn't the other half Lithuanian too? It's not even Russian.
Yeah,
something like
I honestly don't know the full history of that. I just know his mom was Jewish.
Yeah, but
and he grew up partly in Germany. Yeah, like, I mean, it's just like as my kid brother says, it's always the Jews and the Angles.
There will be pockets that would realize what's going. Yeah. No, I could, like, to be fair though, I could imagine there would be pockets that intuit what would go on, but those people would quickly be suppressed, I think.
They would all be
no, there's just no way. Like, these guys are absolute paupers. They're never, like, I don't know, people live like, I mean, if you take, like,
I'm trying to be fair, I'm trying to be fair to them. I'm trying to be
I know. Okay, so Kamala wins, Russia's defeated, and Kamala says, okay, yeah, you know what, Nazism
we'll have a far-right
in Ukraine is fine.
Yeah,
like, where I'm just saying, if you I said this at the beginning of the war. I said this.
Yeah.
Even before the war started, even when we weren't sure the war was going to start, I said, I mean, this several things I said right off the bat, right? Concessions to white interests would have to be given in case, like, the war breaks out and whites are going to be involved.
Yeah.
Right? Some amount of mirroring with, like, Ukrainian nationalism would have to happen. So those articles about right-wing militias in the Donbass,
they have to stop.
That has to stop, right? And it did.
Yeah.
The other thing I said was another concession might be immigration.
Yeah.
Right? And I said, right, like, for Western countries to deal with immigration, I even said this to somebody I know who's half Jewish. I said, don't ask white people to take care of immigration policies. This is something Jews have to talk to other Jews about. Like, let's stop pretending that we don't live in a Jewish mafia state. Okay, so please get real with yourself.
It's going to take, like, Bill Ackerman types to really.
Yeah, like, and that's and I said back in, like, December, January, early February, 2022, late 2021. I said, like, some kind of a deal would have to be struck, and then after October 7th, I just reiterated that, like. That, and I said that there would, a deal, a compromise would have to happen, and that's why you have Trump, and Trump is going to allow Netanyahu to do whatever he can within his abilities. Now, if Netanyahu stops, it's because there isn't enough arms or money that America can give him. Unlikely, but it'll be that. It won't be because Trump will rein him in, even if it might on the surface appear that way. So basically, I think on an unconscious level for 2 years, whites have understood that just side with us against Russia, and we might get some right-wing concessions for our own countries. And this
Right.
is where you get like crazy fantasies about, it was Putin all along that was flooding our countries, right? This is
Yeah.
right.
The
You
Yeah,
Wagner
understand what I
group
mean? Like
was
that's
bringing over the migrant boats.
yes, right. No, it wasn't because like you blew up the Middle East for the last 3 years, and then you had like left-wing organizations that brought them in. You literally had like it's been said before, you had a certain ethnic group that wanted to keep Israel extremely strong in the Middle East, and nothing could ever threaten it. And you had this people of the same ethnic group of a different political persuasion who wanted the refugees to come into Europe. And America was spared getting most of them. Okay, they got some of them, but it was really Europe that was inundated with them.
They
And
figured
to a lesser
America has enough South Americans flooding the border, so
yeah,
it's like, yeah. No, but what I mean is that, okay, so the very first element, which is at least aesthetically white appeasement, right? What did Kamala produce? What did the Democrats produce? Do you remember
the
his name?
largest wave of illegal migrants in
Oh,
American
that's
history.
no. But I mean during the election. I forget his name now. Like who fucking cares about this guy anymore? Oh yeah, Tim Walz. Tim Walz. That's what they produced.
Big mouth.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they produced. That was their model of white appeasement. A minstrel show, right?
Yeah.
So that
pathetic.
didn't work out. Or Harry Sisson.
She was literally more based than him. At least she carries a Glock.
Yeah. Yeah, at least she like put, criminals away in prison at one point. So, unlike Tim Walz, right, who only put, parents that don't want their kids being trans in prison, not, criminals, but whatever. So Tim Walz was the model of white masculinity for the Democrats, along with Harry Sisson. And so that failed spectacularly, as the election has showed, right? So now they're doubling down. They're saying, well, we obviously have to hate white people. We have to hate white women in particular, because they're the ones that voted for Trump. And so at least the first element of that failed. Anti-immigration, Kamala was doing this weird thing where she was like reiterating a very pale and thin gruel version of what Trump wanted, which is anti-immigration.
Or to go back further than that, the immigration debate at the end of last year, beginning of this year, where they had the quote-unquote compromise border bill that took a few of Trump's points, but then also had massive caveats for legal immigration.
It alerted with pork of other things, and that's why the Republicans rejected it. And so then the Democrats could say, see, you're not really serious about anti-immigration, because you rejected our bill that just so happened to have a bunch of other Democrat bullshit attached to it. By the way, I think America, there should be some act of Congress or some constitutional amendment that should limit the scope of bills presented to only one or a few issues, instead of packing bills with all of this other extraneous bullshit that has nothing to do with them, right? But of course, for some weirdo reason, America says, well, that would be just too complicated, and that would mean that, politicians would have some form of transparency they'd have to adhere to.
Think of all the staffers you put out of work.
Yeah, exactly. Think of them. Like, think of all of the policy wonks. Think of all the Matty Iglesias you'd have to put out of work. It's so tragic. I wouldn't even think about that. Another tragedy would be, how is the war going to affect the Gagarin Cup in the KHL in Russia this year? I don't even think that the Donbass team. I don't even want to think about that. Anyways, no, I joke. But that's the two things I'm really worried about, is how the Ukrainian war is going to affect black metal bands and hockey. Okay, so it's like,
yeah, me too.
Yeah, but anyways, I joke. So the model of white masculinity, that obviously did not pan out for the Democrats. So now they've just doubled down on what they already wanted anyways, right? So whether Trump can rein enough people in terms of foreign policy as in regards to Eastern Europe, now, for the sake of not blackpilling, I mean, okay, what can I say? I can't really deny reality. Reality being that it didn't matter who was going to win. Israel was going to do whatever it wanted anyways, right? Even with Kamala.
But the thing is, Israel can't do it without America.
Right, exactly.
Like after, like by October the 14th or 15th, like a week after October 7th last year, America already piped it, like gave them $8 billion.
Yeah.
Right. And then military aid on top of that. Right. Like they can do nothing without America.
Right. But I was going to say, like, in regards to not blackpilling, my only
that's the concession that I'm talking about. Like, you get, like, white man, you can, as long as you adhere first to like Jewish interests, we can give you a few, there can be a few caveats in the liberal order.
I like to call it the Rufo-ification of discourse when you really think about it. Yeah, exactly. You can get rid of by POC heads of Harvard, but that victory will be handed to you because of this greater culture war that's happening on the left and various other ethnic interests in the progressive stack that are realizing, well, oh, holy shit, like this thing is real now. No, but what I was going to say is, like, my only hope is that Trump would follow through with his, like, sort of, I'm a supreme negotiator, I'm the anti-war candidate, and he would, like, tell Netanyahu to, like, calm down or whatever. But
no, that's not. Yeah, I strongly doubt it. I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe we should get into like deeper about the Trump administration and the people who've moved in.
Let's do that. Yeah.
So, I mean, my take is that when I first saw the pics that these were a younger generation of neocons. Like, some concessions are going to have to be made. Like, there should not be this dichotomy about how much effect do you think like Zionists will have and neocons will have on Trump. Like, there's no separation in that. Like, his administration has those elements. They're younger elements, they're faces you don't recognize, but they are there, right? And it is what it is, right? And those are just the concept that, like, that's really where we are right now, like it or not. That's how much we don't control our own destiny.
Yeah.
So, that's just a little bit of realism. I don't know what he's going to do, to be honest, because I don't know, like, what the next 2 months are going to be like, and to what extent, like, I mean, I think the Europeans are going to begin to panic more and more. Like, let's say unexpectedly Pokrovsk falls by Christmas, Orthodox Christmas, and like, I think the panic will be very, very tangible then, right? Like, just consider, like, how long the Ukrainians have been in since August the 6th in Kursk, right? Like, they've been waiting for this moment for their F-16s to carry long-range missiles and to attack Kursk, primarily the nuclear power plant, for a very long time. Now, I don't know what Trump is going to do to stop that if that happens. If it happens, what is he going to do, right? That's just going to be used, like, as a bargaining chip. And the stuff that purportedly his administration to be has come up with has been, we're going to have, like, I don't know, several 100,000 troops from EU countries patrolling this area. Like, get real, dude. It's not going to happen. So there isn't anything tangible. Like, really, the only thing that can happen he just stops aid. But what will they do to him if he stops aid? Because, like, like I said, like, he is a Zionist. His family have been Zionists for multi-generations. Like, I mean, he bought a building in Brooklyn that he just donated to choose to build a synagogue there.
And look at his grandchildren and
yes,
who his
I
children
mean,
are
his father
to.
did. Sorry,
but
what's that?
No, you're right.
Yeah,
but yeah, going back to the family connections, it's quite literally in the bloodline now, and even just from raw self-interest, if he's thinking about his future generations, of course he's going to be a Zionist. But I did want to touch on the point you were going to make about Ukraine, where Trump has really found himself in a damned if you do, damned if you don't position, because either the status quo can continue, Ukraine is going to collapse on his watch either way, but he also is not in a position to bargain, because number one, what do we have to offer the Russians? What can the West, under Trump, under anyone, offer the Russians at this point?
No.
It's just not there. It's just not there. And Trump can't back away. It's going to make him look weak. That's not something he's going to want to do, especially coming right into the administration. And also, Ukraine collapsing without negotiations is not something that he wants. So he can continue up the escalation ladder, which there's really not many options left. I know that the big push is he's going to put on the real sanctions, which means, I guess, harsher enforced oil sanctions, while the Europeans themselves are saying that we need to buy oil directly from the Russians so we stop paying premiums through third parties. Where the tools of deterrence and escalation, short of direct intervention, are few and far between at this point. And
he's going to try to appeal to the Indians and the Chinese as well.
yeah, I think that's it. He's going to go through India, go through China, try to get them to flip. But I said this back when he was running. I said this back towards the beginning of the year. What I think Trump's main policy towards Ukraine is going to be is at least publicly shifting the burden onto Europe. The Europeans will have to fund them. They'll have to give them weapons. Now, of course, Europe is in a sorry state itself, so it's not going to be able to do that on its own. So the Europeans are going to get backdoor aid from the U.S., which is later going to be passed to Ukraine, where officially, publicly, we have absolved ourselves from the situation. It's France's problem. It's Germany's problem. It's Brussels' problem. But, of course, who do they answer to? They answer to Washington. And that's all going to be coming from Washington. So Trump can say, I got us out of Ukraine, it's Europe's problem now, and they're working on the peace settlements. Where, like I said, it's just a back channel, but it is business as usual. And this is going to continue, once again, either until Ukraine's government falls in on itself, or there's some sort of wider intervention. And I think one is much more likely than the other. I think the former is much more likely than the latter in that situation.
You know how I know that's a possibility?
Go ahead.
Oh, really quickly. Because I remember one time, I don't know why I landed on this, but just I think my old man was going into a store to get something, and I was outside in the car, in the truck, and I was like listening to the radio, and I just so happened to catch a little bit of Ben Shapiro's radio show.
Oh, no.
And do you remember that with Ben Shapiro, he was like a never Trumper, but then he defected to Trump because he like knew the way the wind was blowing? Well, he said that exact same thing. And I think if Ben Shapiro has Trump's ear, then this is what's going to happen. He's like, well, notice how he doesn't say that he's like, I think the war is stupid, or I think the war shouldn't happen, or whatever. He said, well, Europeans should pay their fair share because it's a European continental war, and they haven't been paying their share in NATO, and therefore Trump should tell the Europeans, listen, we like the Ukrainians, but they should be funded by you. And it's like, that's exactly what, it's a win-win for Trump.
They literally dragged Europe, except for Britain, they dragged them into fighting Ukraine. And then they say, you have to it's your continent.
Yeah. No, it's a win-win when you think about it, because then Trump, like, he doesn't have to, like, really say that, like, listen, I'm a Vatnik, okay? Like, J.D. Vance, he's a Vatnik. He can, like, appease Western libtards, at least to an extent. Although they're always going to think that, Russia bought the election for him or whatever stupid crap, right? But he could say to his constituents who are, like, neocon boomers, and he could say, listen, it's not that I don't like the Ukrainians. They're great people, the best. But the Europeans, they have to fund the war. And they're like, yeah, you know what? We're Americans. Fuck those Europeans. Freedom fries. And so it's like,
tap into the inner hatred for Europe Americans.
Exactly. And then, because we know that they cannot fund the Europeans cannot fund the Ukrainians, then Trump can swoop in and say, listen, we need to go to the negotiating table because it's really hurting NATO. Sort of like, I got that line from the first season of Sopranos, Mahaffey, the crooked doctor who was a degenerate gambler. He had the debt to Hesh, and he goes, listen, he has a new partner, you, and he's going to defraud the American Medical Association because they pay, like, American medical insurance. They, like, pay for all these, like, bogus tests or whatever. He goes, he either keeps you on as a partner, or he can pay us the money, which he cannot do, or it's going to be a rainy day in Lyndhurst. So, Trump's going to say to the Europeans, you have to pay the Ukrainians, which you cannot do, or it's going to be a rainy day in Odessa. And so, like that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Let me give you a scenario. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say, I mean, this could all be undone tomorrow because the Ukrainians launch a big attack into pre-World War before 2014 Russia, right, with ATACMS. Now, the British said they don't have enough storm shadows for them, and the Germans said that they're not going to give them their Taurus missiles. So that leaves the French with their Scalp missiles. So let's say they use some kind of Western armament, Scalp or ATACMS. Let's say they don't, just follow me, they don't attack, right? Of course, all of this can be undone if they do. They don't attack. Trump is sworn into office, they still have an attack, and then they attack, right? Like, who is, like, I mean, part of American establishment, a good part of it is just going to, I mean, Zelensky will be looked at as a rebel if his stature isn't diminished, and there are hints that it is going to be diminished, because currently they're working on having elections next May, right? They do want him out. They do want him out. So in that scenario, like you could have Zelensky do something, but then what is Trump going to do, right? Another scenario is that they happened before, and then Trump has to deal with it. Remember that Trump in 2016 was happy to supply them with javelins and all kinds of munitions. Like I just Trump said, I don't know how much Trump actually knows about anything, right? I think he really does love America. Like I really do believe that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he doesn't have a huge ego. He does. And it doesn't mean he doesn't want a legacy. He does want that. I think ever since that dinner where Obama ridiculed him, right? The guy literally said, I'm going to take your job. I'm going to become president and show you up. Like, remember Obama with the stupid mic drop? Like, so I guess what I'm saying is this, it's, I don't know what his resolve is. And I don't again, he could stop aid, and his victory is literally like it was a sweep. There's just no other way to, the Democrats have always harped on about winning the popular vote. Them not winning the popular vote, like that casts 2020 into like real doubt.
Oh, don't worry, they're working to rectify that as we speak in Pennsylvania and California.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm just rambling, but I wanted to just because they just occurred to me, these scenarios of what happens if the Ukrainians do this and they're not supposed to, you know what I mean? After he's inaugurated, what do they do if it happens before? I'm just trying to sort of war game what would be Trump's reaction.
Well, another scenario that could very well arise, and there's precedent for this from Trump's first term, where he calls it off. He says Ukraine is a lost cause. Let's cut our losses here, and let's move on. And his subordinates say no. That's what they did in Syria. He said, we're getting out, we're withdrawing.
Yes.
And they said, no, we're not. And he backed down. And you very well could, depending on how fervently pro-Ukraine, I guess you could say the deep state is, we could very well see the same situation where, no, we're not backing out of this, you're going to go along with this, or we're going to do it anyway, so we can either work in harmony, or you can be a prisoner in your own White House again. It's up to you. And I fear that might be one of the more likely scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Plus, the other thing, the way the deep state is looking at it is, Ukraine is just like the first batch of ammunition against Russia. And like maybe they feel like after Ukraine, there could be another one. Like, this is why I think also Biden wanted to prolong the war as long as possible, right? Because they're still hoping that eventually Russia breaks. or Putin leaves office, one or the two, that if the war is long enough, one of those two events will happen. And that's why they don't want to rush in. Like, I think the argument, like, it's a valid argument to say that the U.S. wants Russia to over retaliate for, let's say, Ukraine commits like a horrendous attack like the Kerch Bridge. By the way, some leaked documents came out, and so the British did work on the first attack with the Ukrainians of the terrorist attack where they, anyways. So let's, so it's a worthy argument that, they want Russia to overreact, and that means NATO will rush in. But I think it's also just that they also count on that Russia doesn't want to completely destroy NATO because of its historical ties. And therefore, that's kind of something that works in America's favor, because that can prolong the war, right? That could be another reason why they want to carefully manage Russia's reactions, in order to prolong the war, and in order not to bring it to a quicker end. So, because as I say, what they're looking for is a turnover of Russia. What they want is Putin out of office. They really believe that they may not have anybody, but they may believe that once he's out of office, they could get somebody. Like, the potential is there, right? Because if Putin has to leave office early, that's a humiliation. And it's at that point that any kind of agenda similar to Putin's would be disregarded, or even one. That's what they're betting on.
I think there's only one real solution for Trump approaching Ukraine, and that is he needs to appoint a special negotiator who is none other than Alexei Arestovich.
Could happen.
Good. I wish.
We got this guy's name.
If he got a, let's say,
yeah. What's your name? Arestovich. Arestovich. Sounds very Eastern European. He's the best.
Arestovich would be like the only one in his staff that would roll his eyes at Trump. The other. Yes, Arestovich is such a fancy boy, my God. But he would be the first. He would be like the first pick that I would say, maybe this is a good one.
Now the Russians are sending this guy. What's his name? His name is. They got him out of prison. What's his name? Strelkov. Yeah. They're gonna negotiate together. Lock them together in a room and see what happens. I don't know. Maybe we'll live stream it. Maybe Elon Musk will live stream it on Twitter video. And Arestovich versus Strelkov.
That's the other thing. I love how a lot of his staff were just influencers or worked in the media. A lot of libs are kind of losing their minds over this.
That's great, man. I love it. I love libs. Yeah, the libtards are going insane because a lot of them are just like influencers and like like doing the Joe Rogan circuit. So
the Fox and Friends cabinet.
Yeah, the Fox and Friends Yeah, the Joe Rogan Fox and Friends cabinet. Yeah, that's great. We're gonna live stream. Arestovich and Strelkov are going to do a Twitter space. Then Trump's like, they could speak English, right? Well, maybe. They're gonna get Lavrov and Arestovich in the same Twitter space, and they're gonna. Elon Musk's going to be the moderator.
Twitter space.
Like, dude, Elon Musk said, well, this guy's demanding on. His name is Medvedev. How do you pronounce it? He wants Medvedev. On the space. Yeah, and they have like Mario Nafal is like, yeah, Medvedev wants to be in the Twitter space, and it's like I could just like imagine this Twitter space in my head that's going to determine the fate of Ukraine. Oh, it's terrible.
We did it. We solved the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
You hear about large suicide rates for American veterans, but this will be the event that will cause like a large number of Ukrainian veterans suicide.
God, revolutionary suicide. Yeah.
What the fuck did I fight for?
You mean to tell me that Twitter space?
This is how it ends.
Yeah, this is how it ends. Like Elon Musk, he let on cum graper 1488 to say his piece about Ukraine and Russia.
Well, with all the recent news out of Ukraine, with elections potentially being 2025, I'm going to revisit an endorsement I gave earlier this year, not for Donald Trump, but I'm going to say Arestovich 2025. Okay, I'm going to say Arestovich 2026 if I have to. I'm going to endorse Arestovich as many times until he is president of Ukraine. Even if Ukraine does not exist anymore, I will endorse him until he is president of Ukraine. Even a defunct Ukraine, even a government in exile, I will not rest until I see that day.
But it is very funny that Trump is more willing to listen to like online influencers than anyone else. I mean, if Ben Shapiro starts pissing in his ear, like, listen, Trump, listen, you can't let the libs think that you're pro-Ukraine, you're pro-Russia because of the Russia gate. But the Europeans, I mean, they don't like freedom fries, so they have to pay for it. And Trump's like, you know what? Yeah, they have to pay for it. It's like the Mexicans are going to pay. Like, it's the same, you know what I mean? Like, they're basically like Ben Shapiro and other people are telling him, like, listen, you should just basically get the Europeans to shelf most of the cost. And we know they can't do it. Maybe Ukraine will last maybe another half a year or so. But, yeah, it's like, it's none of our problem.
Elon Musk has the opportunity to do something very funny right now, which is just flip the kill switch for Starlink for Ukraine. The minute they send Storm Shadows or ATACMS into Kursk, just flip that switch.
Over. Yeah. No, and then the libs, like, they can't go after him if he's gonna have government protection in Trump's cabinet. So, it's like he could potentially do that. I mean, unless the deep state has other ways of fucking him, but like you never know.
I mean, when you get as far and as high in the business world as Elon Musk, corruption charges can be levied against you. And once again, I will reiterate my position on corruption charges. They don't exist to keep fairness or any sort of, above board activity in business. They exist as blackmail for people like Elon Musk. So when they step out of line, there's the charge. Because you know what? Him, everyone in his milieu, they're all guilty of the same things to, more or less, some more than others. But the minute one of them sets out of line, they get nailed with corruption charges. And I think they probably would try to go after him. And even if he doesn't cut off Starlink to Ukraine, moving into Trump's administration, if he is too influential in the quote-unquote wrong directions for some people, I doubt there'll be another Russiagate, but he will probably be the target of scrutiny, if anyone.
Oh, yeah, obviously. That's, yeah. Maybe, I don't know, like, maybe we could have some kind of, like, Russian, like, mail-order bride exchange program where, like, they send, like, Western, like, Chud Trump supporter incels, they, like, send them to Russia or vice versa. They could have something like that, I don't know.
Settling the frontiers of Kamchatka. That wouldn't be bad. Look, I'm just saying, if I have to be part of a population exchange program, which I don't think I will be, I just want it on record right here, right now, that I want to live within the proximity to the Black Sea, okay? I want to live by the coast. Maybe not right on it. I'm not asking for beachfront property, but I want to be a 20-minute drive from the coast. That's all I'm asking.
We'll pull up that photo of the Russian multicultural hucksters here. Pull up that photo again, Constantine.
Yes. The Dream Team.
Yeah, the Dream the Dreamers team. Remember Obama was calling Well, she looks all right, maybe she could tone down the eyeliner, but like she looks all right.
I mean, I can't really get a good gauge for age with the lighting on that picture though. Like,
yeah, like what am I talking about, man? Like, whatever you do, just don't go for a Russian woman. They're gonna eat you alive. It's over.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm happy I stick to Irish women now.
I was given some very sage advice, possibly by a co-host of the show. If you got to go Slavic, go South Slavic.
Yeah. go to like the more Mediterraneanized ones, like Croatians or maybe Serbian women bad as Russian women.
I don't know. Like,
I don't know.
I mean, it's funny. At one of the churches I attend, the Macedonian church, there's a guy. He's one of the like volunteers, and I always thought his wife looked Russian. And this Sunday, I found out she actually was Russian.
Yeah.
And I just know the face like when I see it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of them are absolutely horrible. They want to get in, but I mean, most of the ones I met, they were fine.
Yeah, I know it's just a stereotype, but like, yeah.
But
anyways, what do you think of the cabinet picks? RFK Jr.
What do you guys go first?
So, on a domestic front, I'll say I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there is some good to be done, especially if this new border czar that they're putting in power, Tom, what's his name?
He's pretty based.
Yeah. If he is able to actually have the right tools at his disposal, I think we could actually get something of a correction of the situation. This is going to be a years-long process in order to really square all of this away. But I can have some positive feeling towards that. Kennedy at HHS, I think under the best of circumstances, a moderately positive force. At worst, he'll just be stonewalled and not be able to do anything.
Yeah.
But if he can bring the FDA to heel and clean things up there and turn it into an effective organization,
and arrest Fauci.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
That's not going to happen, but it would be in based world, yes.
Yes, but then I'll have nothing negative to say about domestic policy. What I expect under Trump is not necessarily an economic improvement, but an economic stabilization where things don't get worse. And I know there's some questions about the tariff policy, and that's going to play into the global dynamics, but I do think there probably will be some sort of stabilization on his watch, unless there are elements who just want to ruin his legacy and push for economic collapse, or push for not collapse, but push for some sort of economic crisis under his watch. Foreign policy, I think I said this last episode. This was before most of the cabinet picks came out, but I'll maintain to the fact that it will be as schizophrenic and as inconsistent as his first term. And that's judging by, once again, you have Rubio probably for Secretary of State.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor. Yeah, they come from the same segment of D.C. I mean, very much the Florida cabinet, so you can tell he's picking local. But Tulsi Gabbard at DNI and picks like that I could see as a moderating force. And I know there's that one Indian guy, Kash Patel or whatever, who they want to put either at the FBI or CIA, which, I mean, if any organizations could use the efficiency that our South Asian friends could deliver, I think they would be the perfect fits for that. But
yeah, you know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of the CEO of a Hammond Corporation in Jurassic World. Where he like takes, BD Wong's character, the evil scientist.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm shutting you down, and Hammond cannot protect you. He goes, what did you expect? You wanted to be vicious. I think, of course this is all bullshit. Of course, like we created monsters that don't look like real dinosaurs. But you need like a strong-willed Brahmin to just like, Trump needs to appoint Indian Bronson for Department of Labor.
Oh no.
Oh boy.
But I do think
he needs to appoint Radfem Hitler as Department of Gender Relations.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, from an acceleration standpoint,
maybe. No, but you have to like balance it out with like someone. I don't know who's the opposite of Radfem Hitler. I don't know.
I don't even want to speculate on that. I'll leave that to you.
Andrew Tate. I don't know.
No gypsies in my cabinet, please. But
Bronze Age pervert would be, yeah.
what did I just say?
Bronze Age pervert for the department. He's like the sub chair of the Department of Health. That would actually work. That would work. They'd bring in Land Shark from Bulgaria.
You see, these are the high skilled immigrants we need.
Yeah, Land Shark. Yeah, RFK Jr. and Land Shark at the Department of Health, and like Land Shark like reformulates all of the Michael Obama school luncheons to be repeat friendly.
Well, Kissinger did say that Trump marks a new era, right? So
yeah, there you go. You know what's funny? I tweeted that out a month or so ago, and I was totally vindicated. I said that Trump's going to mandate that McDonald's uses beef tallow again to like fry the fries. And that's what RFK Jr. like legit said that. He goes, I think McDonald's should go back to beef tallow. I was 100% right,
my brother, this imitation of RFK Jr.
Yeah, I think the Scott Greer one, where he's like on Night Owls. He was like, say I killed my father.
Oh, the poor guy.
The first time I ever heard him speak, it actually it grated on me so bad I couldn't listen. It caused
Why
me
is his
pain.
voice like that again? His vocal cords got crushed or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
He's gotten into some interesting situations that probably have resulted in worse than what his voice has. I mean, like I said, I'll take him if he can, if he's going to do what he says, if he is able to accomplish even just a fraction of that. I'll give him all the credit in the world, despite some of his, let's just say, less desirable traits and
it's like libtardation here and there. Yeah.
I mean, it is strange because I do think one of the biggest takeaways I've had of Trump's government is that it is a proper coalition government. You don't really see in the United States or in the Anglosphere as a whole, really. I mean, maybe in some parts, but to his credit, and like I said, I have a lot of reservations about most of the picks, is that he didn't just go with whoever GOP leadership put in front of him. And one last thing I will say about Trump's cabinet is, judging by his first term, and I think that's a fair metric, his first cabinet had a very high rate of turnover. So we could be looking at these people, and by next year, they could be a memory.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's one of the reasons why 2 shows back I said I don't know if I can. If we know what's going to happen, with his picks, like to predict what I don't know, the first 100 days of office will be like, because what if he gets rid of them? Then
who remembers Rex Tillerson?
Yes, yeah.
He was kind of all right. Rex Tillerson.
I begrudgingly like him. I think he deserves to come back. I think he deserves a second chance.
I always confused him with an abortionist that got killed. What was it, abortionist that got killed? Tillerman?
Something like that.
I always confused the two. No, but like Pompeo definitely has to fucking go. I mean, that's.
Yeah, he's not going to come on. Neither is Lindsey Graham. All those, ne'er-do-wells. But like,
I
mean, this is a younger crowd of Zionists. Like I say, I think like people have to be realistic about where they really are. People of, say, European descent in America and Canada. So, let's get real here. I don't want to blackpill anybody. I know that, I know that in our circles, everybody's saying, "Don't blackpill, don't blackpill." It's like you're rooting for like an NFL team or a hockey team, and if you blackpill, it will happen. It's I don't know. It's just on an astronomical level.
They fucking gave Ryan Reeves 5 games for that totally legit hit on Darnell Nurse. That was fucking bullshit. Because they hate the Maple Leafs, okay? Not that fucking Reeves was doing anything anyways, but anyways. No, yeah, it's the same thing. A lot of people do have that sickness, unfortunately, of like it is.
Yeah.
Politics is kind of like a sports team thing now.
Even though I think if you've made it as far as the war report, then a lot of those illusions probably don't have that much sway on you. I think that we have a pretty grounded view of reality, despite some of the things we may say on here.
Yeah. No, but I think Trump does embody, like, Trumpism does speak to a lot of young men in ways that, in terms of their political representation, had never been thought of before. Like, I mean, just the image of like a night ago, like literally the most winningest winning UFC champion of all time, John Jones, doing the Trump dance, giving him the title at ringside with the cabinet. Like, that's like, you know, with Joe Rogan, like that's, you know what I mean? Like, that is something. Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Mike Johnson, RFK Jr. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, you can't buy that sort of publicity or representation for a particular demographic of American young men.
Look, I'll have you
and
know,
even
as
some
a
older
young man, I have not felt represented in politics since Paul Ryan was on the scene. Okay, he's the youth, he's the future of the GOP, and you know, he really speaks to the young people.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put the ancient Giga Chad. Remember Paul Ryan? I'm gonna sneak that out right now. You know, do you remember when he had that photo where he had like the 20-pound dumbbells?
Oh no, yes.
Yeah, remember that one? Yeah.
Unfortunately,
that was funny.
But no, seriously, at your point, you're right. It has been a very much a, to use an
wild
term,
ride
paradigm shift with Trump, having surrounding himself with a lot of figures that you wouldn't think would really be involved in politics in any serious matter. At least for the time being. But like I said, I think
it's the appeal of like the dream team is being assembled sort of deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
I said this in the video I made explaining why I came around to Trump this time around, despite having been so critical of him previously. And I've said this on subsequent episodes of the War Report. But ultimately, where I stand now, and I'm waiting to be proved wrong, I'm not optimistic about this at all, that there is some avenue of positive change that can be affected through Donald Trump and possibly the people around him. I'm not saying it's going to be anything great, but things could move a few inches in our direction. I think for that, it might just be worth it.
Yeah. I mean, plus, can you imagine Kamala's cabinet if she would have won?
Oh,
God.
Somebody worse than Tony Blinken, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I would be writing letters begging Kamala to keep Biden's cabinet. Keep Blinken, keep Sullivan, keep Yellen, keep all these people. Keep Lloyd Austin. Don't bring in your people.
Rashida Jones for Secretary of State.
Don't even say
Ilhan Omar for Secretary of Defense. Yeah.
That might actually be kind of funny though, putting
that would be funny.
People who are that far on the other end, just like from an acceleration standpoint. And you see, you're not going to get that kind of acceleration from Kamala though. So not to dash anyone's hopes and dreams, but that might. I'm not saying I would have ever voted for her just on principle, but that might have been interesting to see if she did feel the need to pander to the left so much that she put in people who ended up being right for the wrong reasons on some issues.
It would be good content, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But, yeah.
I wonder what she would have done if she chose Beyonce in it.
Oh, yeah. Or that other one, Megan 3 whatever.
Do you know what my biggest regret of this election is? The fact that Kamala did not choose Josh Shapiro, so the Democratic ticket had to justify this wannabe IDF soldier on the bottom of the ticket. I am so sad that did not happen.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing too. I think what we saw last year and this year from the Democrats is that, I mean, they cannot restrain Israel any more than, say, George Bush. I mean, George Bush could restrain them much more. And you know, of course, we have these loyalties, these loyalty to Israel laws that that have come about. First under Blumf, they mushroomed under Biden. And I think, like, now we're going to see that America is going to continue to go in this direction, and you're not seeing the protests on the campuses. I, by the way, had no problems with the protests on the campuses. I thought that was a good thing. And I don't care if libtards were protesting on the campuses against Biden. I'm too politically astute to give a shit about that. But you can see that you can see that the Democrats are not. That's it. It's gone. Those protests aren't coming back. And if you want to project another 4 years later down the road, if a guy like Gavin Newsom is running for president, he probably will not be any different than Kamala or Biden.
Oh, not at all.
So,
or Obama.
So I think this is it. That's it. There's not going to be any restraint to, to Israeli interests, and probably to a lot of Jewish interest in America as well. That will increase. They'll have to manage that somehow. It all depends on what happens in the Middle East, of course,
Yeah,
because
I was about to say, if the Israelis get egg on their face in these next 4 years, even with Trump being there, even with Trump being their biggest supporter, I think that's going to change dynamics a lot. If the current conflicts very much take a direction against Israel that America cannot bail itself, that America cannot bail Israel out of, then we're looking at a completely new dynamic.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
today on Channel 12 News in Israel, there's talk by Netanyahu about expanding the war into Syria. That could be the tripwire
Oh,
that Ukraine isn't,
Oh
right? Like
God.
this is what I mean. Like somewhere along the way, like if they've restrained migration, like somewhere along the way, you're going to have to pay for it. For me, that sums up his picks
yeah,
for the
that's
cabinet. And also, don't forget that Gabbard is she's pro-Israel. Like, I mean, she essentially worked as a spy when she was in the military. That was her role. Like all that talk about her being a Russian agent. Okay, arrest her, right? Like they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like that, I think people give, they give her too much credit. It's also like a lot of normie conservatives that like every time they convert somebody to conservatism or the Republican Party, they're elated. It's
well,
like I just think like this bubble is going to burst. It will eventually come.
because you brought her up, I
And
think she might have an alternative view. I mean, I agree with everything you just said there, but I think what a lot of people have forgotten about Tulsi Gabbard's background is that she does have ties to Hindu nationalist groups in India and is very
yeah.
pro-India as well. And that could be part of the play in order to, if there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
some sort of attempt to fracture the BRICS, she might be a component of that.
Maybe. I mean, I see her maneuvering. It's something to consider. I've forgotten about that, but I think her maneuvering is basically, Trump's maneuvering. Let's stop the war in Ukraine. I mean, this is what they espouse. And let's focus on the Middle East, because we can't do both. It's kind of like why they had to leave Afghanistan in order to focus on Russia, right?
Even
And
though,
it could very well be that Biden, the Dark Brandon, he wants payback because Trump started these talks about the U.S. leaving Afghanistan. Remember, it happened under his watch, not
oh,
Biden's,
the
right?
agreement was signed under Trump and implemented
So
under
you can
Biden.
see the machinations were already in place for a war in Ukraine, even without Trump getting reelected. But so he may or may not have known why they're moving out. But in any case, it could be that Biden wants to have egg on Trump's face if they move out of Ukraine.
Even though, not to
Yeah.
belabor the point, but about Gabbard, was it her or somebody else who actually ended up meeting with Assad in person? Like
It
about,
was her.
yeah,
It
it
was
was like
her. Yeah.
5, 6 years back. Um,
Yeah.
were the contents of that meeting ever disclosed?
I don't know. I mean, it was a while back,
Mm.
so even if they were, I wouldn't be able to remember them. I mean, look, it's just strategy, right? Like
Oh yeah,
she believes that
absolutely.
if you get Russia on their side, it's easier, to contain China, or maybe you get Russia and India to pressure China, or something of the sort, right? Like that's what the strategy there is, and of course Israeli interests.
Oh, naturally.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to see what happens with the deportations. I want to see, like, is it going to get really wild or not, right?
Oh yeah. I hope.
Me too. Well, I'm an accelerationist, just like you, Gio.
They have to live stream it.
Yeah, live stream it. Oh my
Yeah.
God,
Oh.
this is
It'll be
better
like
than the
cops.
Floyd riots.
Well, yeah. What was that cop show they got rid of because of the Floyd riots? That was like on every fucking
Oh yeah.
minute on A&E. What was it called?
Oh, was that one just cops?
No, there was
Cops or
cops, but
bad
there was
boys?
the live. There was the live one, the supposedly live one.
Um,
Live PD. Yeah, it's gonna be live ice, live
well, while we're
24/7 streaming. Yeah.
on the last few minutes of the episode, because we're all drawing to a close, I suppose I'll throw the question back up north. What's with Trudeau's big move to quote unquote restrict immigration?
That's all bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like just the Biden administration and Harris saying similar things.
Yeah.
In order to get reelected, he's afraid of losing big,
which he will.
And they know, all of them know that they've gone too far on this issue.
Yeah.
And now, in many ways, their job is done. They've permanently changed
the demographics of Canada.
So mission's already accomplished. So now they can restrain, and they can override some of their hardcore ideologues that never wanted to stop. But essentially the job has been achieved, and that's why he's saying that. I don't think anybody should pay attention to it.
Oh, no. I figured that was the case. I just wanted to hear it from
yeah.
He didn't have a Saul in Damascus moment. No.
Yeah, no way.
No way. No. He's really fulfilling his father's project in a lot of ways, so it just doesn't,
I don't know, I figured he might have had first-hand encounter with one and thought, we got to shut this down.
I got to tell you, today
I
was driving around with my dad. We went into this shop. And he knows the people in this place, and there's a woman there from the East Coast, and she says, you know how sometimes you know where the conversation is going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I went back to my old town, and it's in Newfoundland. And she said, first 3-4 days, I couldn't figure out what was different about it, compared to living where I am, and in the GTA. And I'm going, she's going to say it was all white.
Oh man!
She keeps talking, and then she's really setting up this preamble, and she says, and then it occurred to me, everybody's white here. And then, of course, the next phrase, I knew exactly what would come up. I'm not being racist. I'm just telling you. I'm like,
there's a lot of people like that now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like saying, I don't care.
I'm actually racist myself.
Welcome
to the racist. It's so tolerant, the racism community. Yeah.
Now, about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a friend, and he's talking to me like, sometimes men under the influence of women is a very bad thing, right? And his wife is a shit lib, and he's not. I know he's not. And
I think I know the one. I think you've told stories.
No, different guy.
Different guy.
This guy is Quebecois, and we're talking, and they went to Newfoundland. Remember, this is 4 or 5 years ago. He goes, I went there, and it was like, oh my God, it was like white supremacy. I'm going, why? What did they do? Like, did they attack you? Did they kill a black man in front of you? Like, what are you talking? And he goes, no. And I go, so what is it? Like, what? Nobody wants to move out there. They've been there for centuries. Like, what? What's the big deal? Like, anyways, but I know it's his wife who thinks like that.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
And he goes, yeah, you have a point. I'm going, like, yeah, I know. Like, come on, man. Like, why do you want to deride them for it? Like,
I remember there was this great tweet by some kind of submarnet or whatever. I forget who. Or it may have been like some other anime poster that said like ultimately Indians in Canada is a good thing because it'll normalize racism. So it really has radicalized people. I shall say
It has.
Yeah.
It has. It has.
People won't admit it, but it has. Yeah. Yeah.
I know people that. How can I put this? There are people that I never would have suspected to have a big problem with it that do.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. But thanks, Justin. Thank you so much for all you've done for the racism community. You couldn't
he finally made China pay.
Yeah, exactly. He finally has a good use now. Yeah, normalizing racism.
Remember when Canadian normies thought like Canada was under the Chinese Communist Party? Remember, like, oh my god. Oh my god, that cringe went on for so long. I was like talking to a wall. Like I said,
whatever happened to that, eh? Whatever happened?
Because it wasn't true. So like,
yeah.
I said, you understand, like, if like it's not like Canada's first of all not independent. Number two, if America says China's going to be a problem, Canada's not going to stand in its way. And I mean, they jailed.
No, we love our Chinese investors. How dare you?
They literally jailed. Like, didn't they jail the CEO, that female CEO of Huawei?
Yeah.
Like, why did he do that? Oh, of course, because the Canadian normies, he was feeling the heat from them. It's so stupid. The same people he locked up for protesting against the coup.
Yeah.
But you'll never get through to those people.
That's how power.
Even though there are people, but you'll never get through to them.
Yeah.
In a big sense,
I don't know, like if there's any light at the end of the tunnel in Canada. I want to hope that there is, but I mean, yeah. Well, we'll see. I want to totally black pill, no black pilling, but I don't know.
No black pilling.
It's just the temptation of black pill in Canada is so great. That's the thing. It's
just
it is. Yeah. Like what's gonna happen? Like Polyev gets in and he like maybe restricts it to 2 million a year. I don't know. Like it's just instead of 5 million, it's like So
this makes me want to go to a Tim Hortons with you and talk loud. Like we always do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh and there were Indians there. They did nothing.
What did Henry Kissinger say? Oh, they only have his flattery. And Richard Nixon, have you seen Indian women? My God. Ugliest women in the world.
So true, Dr. Kissinger.
That's a lot of beautiful Indian women, but like, it's just, let's not get into that. But
I like having this show on the air.
Don't bring up the ladies with Geo. Oh my God.
Well, what do you guys think of Usha Vance?
I don't know who that is.
JD Vance's wife, Indian wife.
Oh, okay.
She's all right.
I don't know.
It could be worse.
Could be worse, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? Radfim Hitler had this tweet about like how like she's like fundamentally like an Indian like Brahmin striver woman, and that basically JD Vance is like a child to her, and she's like she's like he's her project.
Oh my God!
I do have to say,
I want to say it's untrue, but
it's kind of true. Yeah.
On the topic of JD Vance, now through my mother's side, I am Scots-Irish, going back like 1600s. And it does pain my heart a little to see Scots-Irish just not continue the tradition. I think he can affect some positive change, but in terms of his personal life decisions, I raised an eyebrow at a couple of them. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, true. What are you gonna do?
I mean, like I said, could be worse.
It is kind of strange. Like Usha definitely is like, she does come off as like a educated striver woman that married a white man for a reason, But it is what it is. Do you know one of their kids is named Vivek? They actually named one of their kids after Vivek Kumaraswamy.
Oh, they named it after him? I figured it was
because they were friends. They were like best friends in university. I think like the story is like there was like several different guys that wanted to get with Usha, but then she like chose the dorky white guy. She chose the chud, and it worked out for the best. Vivek's wife doesn't look too bad either, but like, not that I would ever like go with an Indian. I'm just saying, like, not.
Let us revisit President Nixon's words.
Oh man, I love how Kissinger, like, he clocked Indians like so bad. He goes, "Oh, they have his flattery." Oh man, that's terrible.
He was a bastard, but he was a smart bastard.
Yeah. We're running a foreign policy, not a synagogue.
We need to read that article again on air. I know we did it once before. We got to do it again at some point.
Yeah.
I love how immediately when he died, like you had like frogs on Twitter is like, maybe we should like start memeing, just like troll the libs. You should start like memeing based Kissinger, like it's,
I remember when we read the article for his 100th birthday. It was 6 months before he died.
Yeah.
Getting to 100 out of spite and then just choosing to let go 6 months later.
I hate to say it, but he's up in heaven while Anthony Bourdain's in hell. So, remember, like,
I'm
in Cambodia, and all I gotta say is Henry Kissinger's the most evil man in the world. Well, he outlived you, so. Henry Kissinger smiling down on us in heaven.
I like how much of just like a ball he was at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good grief.
Oh man.
Literally a ball.
I think like he knew that the way forward in Ukraine was negotiation, but like he couldn't like outright come out and say it, but
I mean he did.
Yeah.
But then they just kind of silenced him. We were talking about this in the last show, and even in December 2022, he did say that there should be a negotiation. He was kind of unrelenting about that.
Yeah.
The first time he mentioned it was like June, July of 2022. And I think a lot of people felt like, how could you say that? Did you not see the Kherson offensive? Like, so.
Kherson offensive. Yeah. Oh my God. No, that's what I mean. Like, he was smart enough to realize that, but then they're like, "Oh, well, he's an old man. Fuck him. Who cares?"
That's true.
Yeah. So, but he was like, I mean, obviously, he was going to be proven right. I mean, it's inevitable. For all the evil shit that he did do, I mean, you got to say, like, he was pretty smart. Like, it's undeniable he was a foreign policy genius. It's just that, like, left-wings, they try to cope and they say, "What about all of his blunders?" But it's like, it doesn't really matter when you control the foreign policy of the most powerful nation in the world through the majority of your lifespan. It's like, well, that's kind of a W. I don't care how hard you cope. I don't care how hard any fucking bread tuber makes their little video essays about how Henry Kissinger was evil. Well, it's like, a
couple things on Kissinger. Interesting enough, GSP and I were actually just having this conversation, and I would say that people like Albright, way more evil than Kissinger. Way worse.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Without question. And secondly, you could make the argument that through U.S. diplomacy towards Russia and China, he prevented a lot more bloodshed than what very well could have happened.
Yeah.
Because it was Nixon's administration that stopped the Soviet Union and China from going to war in 1969. That could have been a disaster for everyone. I said, I'm not here to absolve Henry Kissinger of. We've had this conversation at length before, and I'm willing to have it again. Yeah. I'm not here to absolve him of his crimes, but I will say, you can talk about ends justify the means, whatever. Well, at least there were ends to meet. When you had this modern crop of neocons, and not that Kissinger was a neocon by any sense of the word, hawkish neocon, different thing, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But when you have this modern crop of foreign policy elites, let's just call them, there are no ends. So it just, constant justification.
Yeah, one thing you can say about him is that in his own way, at his own time, again, I don't absolve him. He thought he was acting on behalf of America first. He was never what I would say like Israel first or Jewish first. And like nothing could come like at the at the expense of America. So
Yeah. But, you know, it is what it is. All right, it's getting late, boys.
He always comes up. The specter of Kissinger haunts this show.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what? I think it's maybe for the best. He's, in fact, one of these times, you know what? I'm deciding it. We'll arrange this. I don't know when this is gonna happen. I've made these promises before. I'm gonna follow through with this one. We need a show just dedicated to Kissinger,
Yeah.
discussing him, his life, his works, and we're just gonna spend 3.5 hours talking about him. Once again, great program. It's always nice to have Geo on. I feel like we covered a lot of ground tonight. And once again, Geo, thank you once again for
yes,
returning to the program, especially so soon. I know that we usually space out a little bit more than that, but I don't know. Anything you'd like to share with the audience? Anything new coming down the pipe that we should know about?
Well, yeah, you know, like I did that content mining with PCM Christ, where he talked about his book, this like Southern Gothic noir. It's very good. I have a lot of other things going on, you know. Digital Archipelago. I think this week we're covering Condylus again, and yeah. So you know what's very funny about Kissinger is that he was like a manlet, but like he had this like very tall Amazonian wife. Like she was like, it was crazy seeing photos of them together. It's like he really was like a manlet king, you know. He was a size king. So but anyways, yeah, this has been great, boys. It's just I'm tired and
yeah, no
Give
problem.
this man
Thank
your
you for
money.
coming.
You know the drill.
All right.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
good content minded, by the way.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have this other one in store that's like a bit more complicated, a solo one, but maybe this week I'll release it too. Yeah.
Well, certainly keep your eye
Oh,
out for
babooey.
that. I know I will.
Right.
But we'll see you everyone next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.
God bless. Goodbye.